Story 1. The Life and Laundry of a Roman Legionary. The sun has not yet cleared the horizon, but you are already awake. In the thin blue haze of early morning, the camp is a forest of leather tents, each one identical, each one arranged in mathematical precision. The Legion does not sleep in disorder. The very ground beneath your bedroll was measured yesterday evening by surveyors with rods and groma. Even here, miles from any stone-built city, the Romans carry their own small architecture, a temporary geometry of war. You are one of about 5,000 men in this legion, and like the others, you live by the trumpet's call. The tuba's deep note has pulled you from your blanket, and you know what comes next, the morning routine. Before you even consider food, there is the matter of your kit. Your larica segmentata, those overlapping strips of iron that give you the posture of a statue waits in the dust. You inspect the hinges, the leather straps, the buckles. Rust is the enemy, and sweat is its ally. The vinegar water rag you carry is a constant companion, as much a weapon as your short stabbing sword, the gladius. Some mornings you march, others you build. Today is a marching day. Your sarsana, the soldier's load, sits ready beside you. On its T-shaped wooden frame hangs your cooking pot, your ration sack, your spare tunic, your blanket, and the tools of your trade. A small shovel d'alebra, an axe, and a stake for the palisade. The load easily reaches 30 kilograms. The veterans call you Marius Mule, a reference to the reforms a century earlier that turned Roman soldiers into self-carrying machines. You understand the insult, but you also know the logic. The Legion can move without wagons, without supply trains, if need be. The march begins in orderly silence, boots scuffing the dirt in unison. You have walked this pace before, the militaris gradus, the Roman military step, a steady rhythm of about 4 miles an hour. In full gear under the rising sun, it's punishing. But you focus on the small things, the creak of the leather harness, the sound of canteen sloshing, the occasional cough of a man behind you. These are the unchanging notes of a Roman campaign. By midday, the aquilifer, the standard bearer with the Legion's silver eagle, signals a halt. Your cohort fans out to establish camp. The rhythm is automatic. Survey, dig, raise. You sink your shovel into the earth, cutting a shallow trench for the tent, both drainage and order in one. The palisade stakes are hammered into place, forming a perimeter of sharpened wood that will stand only for a night. There is no glory in this work, no story to impress a tavern audience, but you know from experience that the discipline of camp building saves more lives than any heroism on the field. Lunch is a flat cake of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a handful of olives. You chew slowly, seated on your rolled blanket, watching a mule train arrive with sacks of grain. The grain will be milled tonight on small hand querns, each soldier taking his turn. This is how the empire runs, on miles walked, ditches dug, and grain ground into flour. In the evening, your cohort is assigned latrine duty. The Romans take sanitation seriously, and you, shovel in hand, find yourself part of a long line of men digging the pit. A century from now, perhaps no one will remember your name, but they will not have to remember the fevers and plagues that might have followed if you had done this poorly. When darkness falls, the camp becomes a quiet grid once again. The sentries take their posts at the gates. You clean your armor under the flickering light of the oil lamp, running the vinegar rag over each plate and hinge. You think of home, not the city of Rome, for you were born far from there, but a hill village in the provinces. You wonder, not for the first time, how many more marches it will take before the war ends, or if it ever will. And as you roll into your blanket, the smell of dust and leather in your nose, a question lingers in your mind. In the vast machinery of the Roman Empire, are you a moving part, or merely the grit between its gears? The next morning begins not with a trumpet call, but with the low murmur of the camp coming to life. A faint haze of smoke drifts from cookfires as soldiers prepare the day's first meal. Pools, a porridge made from crushed grain. You stir yours slowly with a wooden spoon, the earthy scent of barley mixing with the acrid tang of last night's smoke still clinging to the air. It is not exciting fare, but it fills the stomach and travels well, and that, in the army, matters more than taste. The Legion's pace is relentless, but not every day is a march. Today is a maintenance day, a chance to tend to the hundreds of small tasks that keep an army functioning. You begin with your armor. The larica segmentata is in good condition, but the leather straps must be oiled to prevent cracking. A pot of rendered animal fat passes down the line, each soldier dipping his rag into it, working it into the leather until it darkens and glistens. Beside you, a veteran with a scarred cheek hums tunelessly as he sharpens the edge of his gladius. The short sword is not meant for slashing, but for stabbing in close formation still. It must be keen enough to pierce cloth, flesh, and armor if needed. Next comes the laundry. The Romans take the cleanliness of their tunics seriously, partly for comfort, partly to avoid lice and skin ailments. You and a few comrades carry your bundles down to the stream beyond the camp perimeter. The process is as familiar as it is tedious. Soak the woolen tunic, scrub it with a mixture of water and fuller's earth, a clay-like substance that draws out oils. Then rinse it until the water runs clear. There is talk, as there always is, of the cities of Rome's great public laundries that use stale urine collected in jars as a natural ammonia for whitening fabric. The thought makes you grateful for the cleaner water here in the field. Once the tunics are laid out on the grass to dry, you turn to repairing your caligae, the heavy-soled sandals of the Roman soldier. The hobnails hammered into the soles wear down quickly, especially on the stone roads. From a small pouch, you pull a few spare nails, setting them into place with the flat of your knife hilt. The rhythmic tapping blends with the chatter of nearby soldiers, their conversations ranging from gambling debts to rumors about the enemy's movements. By midday, the centurion calls for a training drill. Even far from battle, the Legion never allows its skills to dull. You form up with your century, shield in hand, facing the wooden practice posts driven into the earth. Each thrust with the gladius must be deliberate, aimed to strike a man's vitals. Each block with the scutum shield must be tight and economical. The hours blur together, your muscles moving more from habit than thought. Sweat runs freely, dripping from your chin onto the dust. In the afternoon, you are assigned to the grain detail. The mule train that arrived yesterday has left heavy sacks of wheat in the granary tent, and it falls to you and your cohort to grind them into flour. Each pair of men takes a hand mill, a heavy stone quern, and begins the slow, circular motion of crushing grain. It is work that taxes the shoulders and forearms more than any sword drill, and yet it must be done daily. Without bread, the Legion stops. Without bread, the Empire stops. Evening brings a rare moment of idleness. Some men gamble with knuckle bones, others sit in small circles, repairing cloaks or carving wooden figurines to pass the time. You choose to walk the perimeter, tracing the line of the palisade. The stakes stand sharp and ready, each one placed with care. Beyond them lies the darkening countryside, where the campfires of scattered patrols wink in the distance. The camp quiets after sundown, the night watch taking their posts. You lie back in your tent, the fabric walls rustling faintly in the breeze, and think about the hundreds of tiny acts that make this army possible. The cleaning, the mending, the grinding, the digging. They are the kinds of labors no poet sings about, yet without them, the eagle standard would never advance another mile. Still, you can't help but wonder. In a world that remembers its victories but forgets the work between them, will anyone ever know what it truly costs to keep the empire moving? The days blend together. A week passes, perhaps two, marked only by the cycle of marching, building, cleaning, and resting. You have learned not to keep track of the exact number. There is no advantage in counting down days when the end is not yet in sight. What matters is the rhythm, and the rhythm never falters. This morning is cold. The ground is stiff underfoot as you unlace your caligae and pull on your woolen socks, a luxury you purchased from a camp follower with the last of your coins. The wind bites at your ears as you step outside, and you see frost clinging to the leather of the tents. The men mutter about the possibility of snow, though the centurion insists the march will continue regardless. The trumpet calls and you form up. Today's march is shorter, bringing the Legion to a hilltop position overlooking a river valley. The location is strategic, but it is the work that follows that occupies you most. The engineers direct you to begin digging a vallum A defensive ditch along the camp's outer line. The earth is frozen in patches, resisting the spade, but steady effort wins in the end. The dirt piles up beside the trench, forming the base for the embankment that will support the palisade. By midday, the cookfires send thin blue smoke curling into the pale sky. Your portion is the same as yesterday: bread, cheese, and a small measure of wine mixed with water. The wine is sour but warms you. A few soldiers talk about a shipment of fresh supplies rumored to be on the way, carried by river barge. There is speculation about whether dried figs might be included, the sort of talk that passes the time but changes nothing. In the afternoon, you are sent to the armorer's tent. The larica segmentata you have worn for years has developed a weak point where two plates meet, and the armorer rivets a new leather strap into place. You watch his hands work, methodical, precise, and think how little separates your life from the strength of that strap. Later, the centurion calls for weapon inspection. Your gladius, though rarely drawn in anger, bears the marks of constant drills: small nicks along the edge, a faint looseness in the hilt. You repair what you can with a strip of linen binding, knowing it is only a stopgap. Some men boast of their readiness for battle. Others, like you, focus only on making sure everything works when needed. Evening brings a different kind of duty. You and several others are sent to collect water from the river. The descent is steep, and the return trip with heavy amphorae taxes your shoulders. The river water is cold enough to sting your fingers, and the amphorae slosh heavily as you walk. By the time you reach camp, your arms ache. After sunset, the camp takes on a different mood. Fires burn lower, the chatter softens, and the shadows lengthen across the ordered rows of tents. You sit with a small group, mending your tunic under the flicker of the flames. The wool is rough against your fingers, but each stitch is steady. It is not perfection you aim for, only function. A soldier's clothing must endure as much as his will. In the quiet, you think of the things that will outlast you: the iron nails in your sandals, the rivets in your armor, the ditch you dug this morning. These are not glorious monuments, yet they are the real substance of empire. Roads, forts, bridges, all built by men like you, each act of labor anonymous but enduring. The poets will write of victories, but the empire's true foundation is the sum of a million unremarkable tasks. When your watch comes, you take your place at the gate. The night is still, the stars sharp above the black line of the palisade. Somewhere beyond, unseen in the dark, the world shifts, enemies move, traders travel, farmers sleep in their huts. But here at your post, the silence is unbroken except for the soft sound of boots on dirt as the next sentry passes. You realize, standing there, that this is the truth of your life. Not the clash of battle, but the steady keeping of order. You are one cog in a vast, grinding machine, and though no one may ever know your name, your labor threads invisibly through the tapestry of history. Tomorrow the Legion will march again. New ground will be measured, new ditches dug, new tunics washed. The work will never end, but neither, it seems, will Rome. Story 2. Sweeping the Pharaoh's floors. You wake long before the city stirs. The air is cool in the narrow streets of Thebes, the mud-brick houses still shadowed in pre-dawn darkness. You sling your reed broom across your shoulder and tuck a folded piece of linen under your arm, your badge of office, though no one outside the temple staff would think of it as such. The great Temple of Amun stands at the heart of the city, its pylons towering above the surrounding rooftops like twin cliffs. You have walked this path so many times that you could follow it blindfolded, counting each turn and stone. By the time you reach the processional avenue lined with stone rams, the sky is just beginning to pale. The first task is simple: open the side gate for the other cleaners and servants. The priests will not begin their rituals for hours yet, but the temple must be spotless before they arrive. You know every sound the great bronze hinges make as they swing open, a groan that echoes faintly between the sandstone walls. Inside, the air is cooler, touched by the lingering scent of incense from the previous day's ceremonies. Your broom is made of bound palm fibers, stiff enough to scrape away the sand that has blown in overnight. Sand is your constant adversary. No matter how smooth the paving stones, the desert always finds a way in, coating every surface in a thin grit. You begin in the outer court, sweeping from the center outward in long, practiced strokes, sending small clouds of dust toward the edges. Other cleaners move in their own sections, each of you knowing exactly where the others will be without a word. Once the paving stones are cleared, you fetch a bucket from the water jar in the corner. This water has been hauled from the Nile by laborers long before dawn, its surface cool to the touch. You dip a linen cloth and wring it out, then kneel to wipe down the carved base of one of the massive columns. The hieroglyphs here tell stories of the gods' victories and the pharaoh's offerings. You have traced them so many times with the cloth that you could recite their order without looking. The sun is rising now, sending a narrow beam through the high entrance, catching dust motes in a golden haze. The light will soon reach the inner sanctuary, and it must be spotless by then. You work your way inward, through hypostyle halls where the air is thick and still. The stone under your knees is cool, the silence broken only by the faint shuffle of footsteps and the occasional drip of water from a cloth. Cleaning the temple is more than sweeping floors. The altars must be wiped, the offering tables polished, the small bronze lamps checked for soot. You are careful not to disturb anything. Even the smallest object in the temple belongs to the god, and moving it without cause would invite reprimand. Some tasks require special permission from the priests, like refreshing the lotus flowers in the ceremonial basins. By the time the first priest arrives, robed in white linen, the temple has changed. The sand is gone, the floors gleam faintly, and the air smells faintly of damp stone rather than dust. The priest nods to you, not a greeting, but an acknowledgement that your part of the morning's work is complete. You step quietly aside as he begins the first chant of the day, the echo of his voice rolling along the painted walls. Outside, the city will be waking, traders opening stalls, bakers lighting ovens, children calling to one another in the streets. But here, in the half-light of the temple, you have already been awake for hours, performing the work that allows the god's house to appear eternal. And as you stand in the shadow of a painted pillar, broom in hand, you wonder, in 1,000 years, when the paint has faded and the stone has crumbled, will anyone think of the hands that kept these halls clean? By the time the sun clears the high walls of the outer court, the heat has begun to settle into the stone. It radiates upward from the paving blocks, turning the air thick and heavy. You remove the linen headcloth you wore during the morning sweep and wring the dampness from it before retying it against the glare. The first wave of temple visitors has come and gone, farmers bringing small offerings of grain, merchants seeking blessings before setting out on the river. Now comes a quieter part of the day, quieter, but no less demanding. The midday cleaning is different from the dawn ritual. This is not about preparing for ceremony but maintaining the illusion of perfection through the busy hours. Sand creeps in again, carried on sandals and robes. Beetles, drawn to the cool shadows, skitter across the flagstones. You move steadily, sweeping in short arcs to avoid disturbing the worshippers still lingering in the side chapels. The temple is a maze, and you know it better than most priests. Behind the grand halls and towering columns lie narrow passages and stairways. Some are used for storage, stacked baskets of incense resin, jars of oil, bolts of spare linen. Others lead to rooms where sacred objects are kept under lock and seal. Your duties sometimes bring you here, for dust and insects do not respect the boundaries of sacredness. In one of these storerooms, you kneel to brush cobwebs from a carved wooden chest. The smell of cedar clings to the air, stronger when you open the lid to check for pests. Inside, wrapped in fine linen, are small cult statues, their inlaid eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. You work quickly, careful not to let the broom's fibers touch the figures themselves, then close the chest and replace the seal. You have never asked the priests about the meaning of each object, not out of fear, but because the answer would make no difference to your work. The heat drives most of the worshippers away by mid-afternoon. In the outer courtyard, you stop to drink from a ceramic jar, the water tasting faintly of river clay. Across the flagstones, another cleaner is polishing the copper basins where visitors wash their hands before entering the sanctuary. He works slowly, rubbing in small circles until the metal gleams. You nod in passing, exchanging no words. Conversation is rare when the air is this heavy. Later, you are sent to the upper walkways. A narrow staircase winds between two walls, leading to a shaded balcony where banners hang from poles. From here, you can see the temple roof stretching out in orderly rows of massive stone slabs, some wide enough for two men to lie upon. Your task is to sweep the dust from this walkway so it does not fall into the courtyard below. The view from up here shows the whole city. The clustered rooftops, the green strip of fields along the Nile, the desert beyond shimmering in the heat. Descending again, you pass through a shadowed corridor where the smell of incense is strongest. Here, in the innermost rooms, the priests prepare offerings for the evening ritual: bowls of bread, jugs of beer, baskets of fruit. Your broom never touches these, it is enough to sweep the corridor outside, ensuring the path is clean when the priests carry the offerings in procession. By the time the sun begins to lower, the stone beneath your feet feels warm even in the shaded halls. You have walked miles without leaving the temple's boundaries. Your broom bristles are frayed. You will need to replace them soon. The work never truly ends. Each hour brings new dust, new sand, new signs that the desert waits to reclaim even the mightiest walls. Yet as you pause in the shadow of a column, watching light slant through a high doorway, you feel a strange sense of permanence. The temple will outlive you by centuries, perhaps millennia, but so will the dust. And you wonder, will the dust remember you, the way you have remembered sweeping it away day after day? The last light of the day lies across the temple courtyard like a sheet of gold. The sandstone columns drink in the glow, their carved reliefs deepening in shadow. You have worked since before dawn, yet there is still more to do. The temple is a living place, and living places never stay clean for long. The evening ritual is the priest's domain, but your work shapes its setting. As the chant begins in the sanctuary, you move quietly through the outer halls, gathering the day's debris. Stray leaves blown in from the courtyard, fine sand in the grooves between paving stones, a scattering of dropped grain from an offering bowl. You collect it all, sweeping into a woven palm basket that you will later empty beyond the temple wall. The sounds of the ritual drift outward. The steady rhythm of sistrum rattles, the deep intonation of the chief priest, the faint crackle of incense resin on hot coals. You pause at the edge of the hypostyle hall, careful not to cross into the sacred area while the rites are in progress. The air is dense with incense, the smell both sweet and resinous, clinging to your skin and clothes. When the chanting stops, the priests emerge carrying the offerings that have been presented to the god: bread, beer, meat, fruit. These are not wasted. After the god has been symbolically nourished, the food is distributed to the temple staff. Tonight you receive a small loaf of barley bread and a fig. You eat slowly, savoring the sweetness, knowing it may be days before such a treat comes again. As darkness settles, the temple takes on a different character. The outer gates are closed, and the bustle of the day is replaced by a stillness broken only by the soft steps of the night watch. Your final task is to walk the perimeter of the inner court with a small oil lamp, checking that no tools or baskets have been left behind. In the dim light, the columns seem to lean inward, their painted surfaces muted to shades of brown and black. In the storage rooms, you secure lids on jars to keep out vermin. In the outer halls, you brush away the faint trails of ants that have found their way toward the offering tables. These are small things, yet in a place where the smallest disorder is thought to dishonor the god, they matter greatly. By the time you finish, the moon has risen above the temple walls. You stand for a moment in the courtyard, broom in hand, gazing at the towering pylons against the star-filled sky. They look as though they have stood forever, but you know the truth. They are maintained, stone by stone, sweep by sweep, by hands like yours. Without that, even the god's house would crumble to dust. When you finally leave through the side gate, the city is asleep. The cool night air feels clean against your face, the faint scent of river water drifting in from the Nile. You walk the familiar streets back to your small home, broom over your shoulder, knowing you will be here again tomorrow before dawn. The temple will not remember your name. The priests will not carve your likeness on the walls. But every day, in the quiet traces of your work, you have kept a fragment of eternity intact. And as you lie down to sleep, you find yourself wondering, when the gods are gone and the stones are silent, will the sweep of your broom be the last thing they forget? Story 3. Counting Grain in the Han Dynasty. The rooster's call comes before the first light. In the clerk's quarter of the provincial granary compound, you rise from your mat and pull on a plain hemp robe. The air is cool, and the sound of distant oxen being led to the fields reaches you through the stillness. Before the farmers begin their day, yours is already in motion. You carry no plow or hoe. Your tools are a bamboo brush, an inkstone, and the endless wooden tablets that hold the life of the empire's grain supply. The granary gates open with a deep creak as the first cart of the day arrives. 2 oxen, their hides slick with morning dew, pull a load of millet in tightly bound sacks. The farmer, hat pulled low, steps down to present his tax quota. You greet him with a nod, take the tally slip from his hand, and lead him to the weighing area. The scales here are simple but precise. A wooden beam, counterweights carved from stone, and hooks for suspending the grain sacks. Each load is lifted, each counterweight adjusted, each reading called out to you by the scale keeper. You write the figures on a bamboo slip in neat, deliberate strokes. This is the heart of the work, the accurate record. Grain feeds the army, the court, the road builders, the temple laborers. Without exact accounting, shortages could cripple the province and invite the suspicion of auditors from the capital. When the weighing is done, the sacks are carried to the granary's interior. The air inside is cool and dry, a faint smell of dust and husk. Rows of earthen bins line the walls, each one assigned to a different village or tax district. You walk the length of the room, counting the bins by habit, checking that the bamboo tally tags hang in the correct order. A misplaced tag can cause confusion that takes days to untangle. By mid-morning, more carts arrive. Some are piled high, others carry meager offerings from poorer farmers. You take them all without comment, recording each amount, though you can see in the farmer's eyes whether this year has been kind or cruel. The richer ones talk freely, boasting of their harvest. The poorer ones speak little, eyes downcast, their thoughts already on how they will make up the shortfall next season. At noon, the sun sits high, and you take your break in the shade of the granary wall. Your meal is plain, a bowl of millet porridge and a slice of pickled radish. Around you, the other clerks eat in silence. There is little gossip here. The ledgers demand attention, and mistakes have consequences that can ripple far beyond the compound. The afternoon is for calculations. In the records room, you spread out the morning slips, arranging them by district. You dip your brush into the inkstone, the scent of pine soot rising faintly, and begin to transfer the numbers into the master ledger. The brush moves slowly, the strokes precise. Even a single misplaced dot can change the meaning of a character, and an incorrect entry could draw the attention of the prefect himself. Occasionally, a messenger arrives from the capital, bearing instructions written in the formal, rigid style of the imperial court. These orders are filed carefully, tied with cord, and stored in a chest reserved for such communications. They may command the transfer of grain to a distant garrison, or the redistribution of surplus to famine-stricken areas. In each case, the order is met with the same process: weigh, record, dispatch. By late afternoon, the carts have stopped arriving and the yard falls quiet. You walk the perimeter, checking the locks on the storehouse doors. A missing lock could mean stolen grain, and stolen grain means punishment not for the thief, who is often never found, but for the officials whose duty it was to prevent it. When you return to your small quarters, The sun is setting behind the tiled roofs of the compound. The day's work will be repeated tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as the emperor's writ commands grain to be gathered and counted. And as you set down your brush for the night, you think. In the grand histories, they will record the emperor's victories and the building of roads, but will they ever write of the hands that kept the ledgers true? The morning begins with an unannounced arrival. At the granary gate, a small party of riders dismounts two soldiers in lacquered armor, a junior official in a dark robe, and behind them, a man carrying a wooden chest bound with cord. The prefect's seal is stamped in red wax across the chest's lid. You know what this means: an audit. The lead official presents a scroll of authority and steps inside without waiting for acknowledgement. His eyes sweep the yard, taking in the carts, the scale, the bins. You set aside your broom and stand ready. The audit will slow the day's work, but it cannot be refused. Every few months, the prefect sends such men to ensure that grain is accounted for, seals unbroken, and records precise. They begin with the bins. One by one, the lids are lifted, the grain stirred with a wooden paddle, and samples weighed against the figures in your ledger. You stand beside the official as he calls out the numbers, your own bamboo slips laid open for comparison. The smell of raw millet rises in dusty waves, clinging to your robe. A single discrepancy could bring days of questioning and, in severe cases, flogging. The soldiers keep a silent watch, their hands resting lightly on sword hilts. They are not here for your safety but for the emperor's property. In the Han dynasty, grain is more than food. It is currency, tribute, and the fuel of armies. To lose it is to weaken the state. After the bins are inspected, the official turns to the records room. He examines the bamboo slips tied in bundles, each marked with the year's cyclical designation. He unties a bundle from last season and checks the characters for clarity. You stand behind him, resisting the urge to shift your weight. If he asks for a calculation, you must produce the result immediately, without hesitation. The man with the wooden chest finally sets it down on the table. Inside are the prefect's seals, carved blocks of hardwood used to impress wax over official cords. When grain is moved from the granary to another location, each sack is sealed, the cord wrapped twice and pressed with the mark. These seals are your protection. If one arrives at its destination broken, you are not held responsible. But if a sack leaves here without the proper seal, the fault is yours. The inspector asks to see the sealing process. You fetch a fresh sack from the store, tie it with cord, and melt a small bead of wax over the knot. The hardwood block presses into the wax, leaving the prefect's emblem, a stylized dragon's head, in perfect relief. The inspector nods. The seal hardens. By midday, the audit is complete. The official signs a slip, affixes his own seal, and hands it to you as confirmation that the day's inspection is passed without fault. You place it carefully into the records chest. Such documents may be called upon years later to settle disputes. Once the auditors leave, the routine resumes. Carts roll in from the countryside, laden with this season's harvest. Some farmers present themselves proudly, their quotas met or exceeded. Others arrive with partial loads, explaining drought, locusts, or illness. Their cases will be recorded for review, but you know that review rarely changes the outcome. The grain owed must be delivered eventually, even if it takes the next year's crop. The heat of the afternoon settles into the yard, and the smell of chaff hangs in the air. You stand at the weighing beam again, calling out figures, recording each with steady strokes of the brush. The rhythm is unbroken: weigh, write, store, tally. Evening brings the day's final task, securing the storehouse. You and the other clerks walk the perimeter, checking every latch, seal, and gate. The bins are closed, the records locked away. The heavy wooden bar drops across the granary door with a solid thud. In the fatting light, you think of the thousands of measures of grain now resting in silence, each one marked, recorded, and guarded. Somewhere far to the east, the capital's kitchens will feed palace banquets. To the west, garrisons will fill their pots with porridge. None of them will know the faces of the men who kept their grain safe. And as you extinguish the lamp in the records room, you wonder, will the empire's greatness be remembered for its battles or for the ledgers that kept it fed? Winter arrives quietly in the south, but you feel it nonetheless. The mornings are sharp with cold. The oxen's breath hangs in the air as they pull the last of the season's carts into the granary yard. The harvest months are past, and now the work shifts from gathering to guarding. In the stillness of early morning, you walk the storehouse floor. The great earthen bins stand in long rows, their lids sealed with a mixture of clay and straw. You tap each seal with the back of your knuckles, listening for the hollow sound that means the bin is full. Some lids now ring duller, a sign that the grain level has dropped, not from theft, but from official orders. Grain flows outward this time of year, to feed garrisons in the border provinces, to supply work crews on distant roads, to provide relief in regions struck by poor harvests. The orders arrive on stiff bamboo slips tied with red cord, the characters written in a hand more formal than your own. You read each one carefully, noting the amounts and destinations before filing them in the chest of imperial commands. Today's order is for the northern garrison at the frontier. 300 sacks of millet, sealed and sent upriver by barge. You watch as the storehouse workers lift the sacks two at a time onto carts, the cords tied tight, the prefect's seal pressed deep into the wax. Each sack is recorded against the bin's tally. Each cart is marked with the garrison's dispatch code. By midday, the yard is crowded with carts ready to depart. You walk among them, checking each seal, your fingers cold against the hard wax. A missing seal could mean suspicion. Suspicion could mean an investigation that lasts months. Accuracy is your shield. When the convoy leaves, the granary yard feels empty. The bins inside are noticeably lower. You calculate what remains against the expected needs until the next harvest. The figures are too close for comfort. A poor season ahead could mean rationing, a word no official likes to speak aloud. Afternoons in the lean months are spent checking for spoilage. You climb the bin's short ladders, removing lids and stirring the grain with a paddle. The sound is like dry rain against wood. Your eyes scan for signs of mold or insect damage. A spoiled bin is a loss that cannot be recovered, and in these months, each measure matters. The farmers no longer come daily. When they do, it is often to ask for grain loans. Some bring small items to pledge a bronze tool, a carved hairpin as collateral. You record these transactions with the same precision as taxes, noting the date by the emperor's reign year and the heavenly stem and earthly branch of the day. Each debt will come due in the harvest season. Some will be paid. Others will be quietly forgiven, written off as the cost of keeping peace. As the days shorten, you work more often by lamplight in the records room. The smell of pine oil from the lamp mingles with the ever-present dust of husks. You bind the season's slips into bundles, each tied with hemp cord and labeled for storage in the archives. Years from now, another clerk may untie these bundles to review the past, perhaps during a famine, perhaps during an audit. The numbers will tell their own story, one of abundance, or of shortage, or of steady hands that kept the ledgers true. The last task of the night is to walk the yard with the watchman. The air is cold enough to make your fingers ache, but you test each lock and seal regardless. The moonlight gleams on the clay lids, turning them pale against the shadows. You think, as you often do, about how invisible your work is. The emperor will never see your name. The people who eat the grain will never know it passed through your hands. But you also know this. Without the ledgers, the seals, the steady count of sacks in and out, the empire would falter. You run your hand once more over the smooth bamboo of the master ledger. The characters are dark, each one shaped with care. They are the only monument you will leave behind, lines of ink in an archive no poet will visit. Tomorrow, the counting will begin again. And though no one will remember the clerk in the hemp robe, the empire will remember his numbers. Story 4. Mending nets in ancient Athens. The harbor at Piraeus is still half asleep when you arrive. The air smells of brine and tar, the faint slap of water against the wooden hulls marking the slow rise of morning. The fishermen have been gone since before dawn, their black-sailed boats pushing out toward the deeper waters where the silver shoals are said to be running. Your work begins not at sea, but here on shore, in the quiet hours before the boats return. You lay out your nets in the pale light, each one coiled and folded after the last trip. They are made of twisted flax cord, stained dark from seawater and years of use. The salt stiffens them. Your first task is to work the knots loose with your fingers, flexing the cord until it moves freely again. A well-kept net lasts longer, and a longer-lived net means fewer hours spent spinning new cord. From your pouch, you draw the wooden needle long, flat, and notched to hold the repair cord. The method is simple. You thread the cord through the broken mesh, knotting it tightly to close the tear. The work is repetitive but requires attention. A weak knot can unravel in the first heavy catch, wasting a day's labor at sea. You sit cross-legged on the dock, needle in hand, the rhythm of your stitches keeping time with the water lapping below. Around you, the harbor slowly wakes. Shipwrights begin their hammering on a trireme's hull. A vendor wheels in a cart of olives and figs for the morning market. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp in the air. You glance up now and then, scanning the horizon for the dark smudges of sails. The fishermen will return soon, and they will want their nets ready before the next tide. Repair work is only half the job. You also clean the nets, removing the remnants of the last haul bits of seaweed, shells, and sometimes the stubborn bones of fish too small to keep. The smell of old fish oil clings to your hands even after you wash in the harbor shallows, but you have long since stopped noticing. When a net is too damaged to repair, you strip it for salvage. The undamaged lengths of cord are coiled for reuse. The rest is set aside for burning. Rope is costly in Athens, and no piece, however small, is wasted. Sometimes, when the work is slow, you twist fresh cord from flax fibers, rolling them against your thigh to bind them, then braiding them into stronger strands. By mid-morning, the first boats appear, sails slack as they drift into the harbor on the current. The fishermen's shouts carry across the water, a mix of greetings and news of the morning's catch. They tie up to the dock, and baskets of fish are lifted ashore glistening silver in the sun, scales flashing like coins. You help unload a friend's boat, the wooden hull damp under your palms, before returning to your place with the nets. The repaired meshes are spread out in the sun to dry, the cord softening slightly in the heat. You check your knots one last time, tugging on each repair to be sure it will hold. A net that fails at sea is more than a nuisance. It can mean the loss of the entire catch, a day's work gone to the depths. As the market fills with the smell of fresh fish, you sit back on your heels and look at the line of drying nets. They are not beautiful things, rough, patched, uneven in places, but they are the lifeline between the sea and the city. And you wonder, as you coil the last length of cord, in a city that praises the warriors, the philosophers, and the orators, will anyone remember the hands that kept the nets from failing? The sun climbs higher, flattening the shadows along the dock. By now, the morning's fishing boats have all returned, their catches sorted and taken to the market stalls a few streets inland. The air smells of brine, fish, and the faint tang of pitch from the shipwright's yard. Your own part in the work has shifted, the repair benches are full, and now you join in the midday sorting and preparation of the gear for tomorrow's sail. A fisherman named Leon brings you a net so torn it looks more like a tangle of seaweed than a piece of equipment. He tells you it was caught on a rock shelf, pulled hard by the tide, and the cord gave way in half a dozen places. You spread it out on the dock planks, examining the damage. The edges are frayed, the mesh stretched unevenly. Repair is possible, but it will take the rest of the afternoon. Leon shrugs. He knows the price of a new net and would rather wait for the repairs. You begin with the largest tier, your wooden needle loaded with fresh flax cord. Each knot must be tied with the same spacing as the original mesh. Too tight, and the net will strain unevenly. Too loose, and it will lose fish. You measure by eye, your hands repeating motions learned years ago. The knots are simple but must be firm. the cord looped twice before pulling tight. You pause only to wet the cord in seawater, keeping it supple as you work. In the shade of the dock canopy, other net menders work in silence. The sound is the same at every bench. The faint scrape of cord against cord, the occasional creak of wood as someone shifts position. Now and then, a gull lands nearby, eyeing the scraps of fish that cling to the drying gear. One bold bird hops close enough to peck at a knot you've just tied, and you wave it off with the end of your needle. At midday, you take a break, sitting with a small group of fishermen on overturned baskets. The meal is simple bread, olives, and a wedge of goat cheese. Someone passes around a skin of watered wine. Talk drifts between the weather, the price of fish in the Agora, and the gossip from Athens proper. A merchant has returned from Corinth with tales of a new type of hook. Another man claims the Spartans are training for another naval campaign. These matters feel far away from the steady work of keeping nets intact, but they fill the air as much as the salt wind. After eating, you return to Leon's net. The sun has shifted, its glare now bouncing off the water into your eyes. You squint against the brightness and continue nodding, your fingers growing stiff from the repetition. As the repairs grow, you test each section by pulling hard against the dock cleat. The mesh holds. That is all that matters. In the late afternoon, the shipwrights haul a half-finished fishing boat down the slipway. It groans as it meets the water, rocking gently against its mooring rope. The smell of fresh pitch mixes with the salt air. You watch for a moment, thinking about the interwoven tasks that keep the harbor alive: the carpenters shaping hulls, the sailmakers cutting cloth, the net menders tying knots. No single trade can work without the others, yet each labors quietly apart. By the time Leon returns for his net, the sun is beginning to lower. You hand it over, still damp from the final seawater rinse. He tests a few knots, grunts his approval, and leaves without ceremony. It's enough. You don't need thanks. The knots will speak for themselves tomorrow when they hold a full catch. As you gather your tools, you glance at the row of drying nets and think. The philosophers in the city speak of the polis as a great net that catches the people and holds them together. But here, at the harbor's edge, you know that a net is only as strong as the knots no one notices. By the time the sun slips below the hills behind Piraeus, the harbor changes. The noise of the market fades, replaced by the low murmur of men mending gear by lamplight. The air cools, carrying the smell of seaweed and charred fish from the cooking fires along the quay. You stay behind as others drift home, the last of the nets spread out before you in the glow of an oil lamp balanced on an overturned crate. There is a different rhythm to the work at night. The day's heat has gone, and with it the constant bustle of the dockside. Now you can hear the water against the hulls more clearly, the groan of mooring ropes, the occasional splash as a fish breaks the surface somewhere out in the dark. The lamp throws a small, steady circle of light over your hands, leaving the edges of the net in shadow. You work by feel as much as sight, fingers finding the next break, threading the cord, pulling the knot tight. A fisherman named Diodoros stops by, a coil of line over his shoulder. His boat leaves before dawn, and he needs 2 small repairs on a throw net, a lighter mesh used for shallow water fishing. You take it from him and set to work while he sits nearby, telling you about the morning's catch. The stories are unremarkable: a good haul of mackerel, a few octopus tangled in the lines, but they pass the time as your fingers move. When the repairs are done, you hand the net back and Diodoros presses a small copper coin into your palm. It's more than you expected, and you nod in thanks without words. In this trade, payment is not always in coin, sometimes in fish, sometimes in shared meals, sometimes in nothing at all. The work is part of the harbor's unspoken pact. Everyone's livelihood depends on everyone else. You return to your own pile of gear, sorting through a set of deep-water nets with large mesh. They are heavier, the cord thick, the knots stubborn. You retie one section, then another, losing track of time. Around you, the lamplight of other menders flickers and goes out one by one until only your lamp remains. Finally, you finish, coiling the repaired nets neatly and setting them aside. You pack away your needle and cord, tip the last of the lamp oil back into its jar, and stand to stretch. The harbor is silent now except for the water and the distant creak of a mast. The moonlight catches on the drying nets, turning them into silver lattices against the dark. You think of the men who will haul these into their boats tomorrow, casting them out in arcs over the water, trusting them to hold fast when the catch pulls hard. You will not be there to see it, but your work will be there in every knot that doesn't slip, in every fish brought to shore. As you walk home along the quiet streets, the smell of the sea clings to your clothes. In the city's memory, it will be the victories at Salamis and the speeches in the assembly that endure. But here, in the shadows of the harbor, you know another truth. An empty net catches nothing, and without the quiet work to keep them whole, even the strongest fleet would starve. Story 5. The Long Road to Santiago. The sky is still dark when you rise. The air in the hostel is cold, heavy with the scent of wood smoke from the embers in the hearth. You pull on your wool tunic and worn leather shoes, the soles softened by years of wear, and wrap a cloak around your shoulders. The only sound is the breathing of the pilgrims still asleep in the long hall, lined with pallets stuffed with straw. You are not a pilgrim, though you live among them. Your work is to keep the Hospital de Peregrinos, the pilgrim hostel, ready for those who travel the long road to Santiago de Compostela. Each day begins before the first bell from the church tower. The building must be swept, the fire coaxed back to life, and the water jars filled before the pilgrims wake. You step outside into the crisp dawn, a bucket in each hand. The well lies a short walk from the hostel, along a dirt track bordered by low stone walls. The grass glistens with frost crunching under your feet. When you reach the well, you lower the rope hand over hand, hearing the bucket strike the water below. The climb back with the full buckets is slower, the weight biting into your fingers. Back at the hostel, you pour the water into the ceramic jars in the main hall. It will be used for washing faces, hands, and feet. The dust of the road clings stubbornly, and many pilgrims arrive with blisters or sores. You lay out the cleanest cloths you have, though clean is a relative word in a place where laundry is done in cold river water and dried over smoky fires. Next comes the sweeping. The rushes that cover the floor are gathered up and shaken out in the yard, the dirt swept into a growing heap that you will later carry away. Fresh rushes, cut from the riverbank days earlier, are spread across the floor to give the hall a faint, green scent that almost hides the smells of sweat, leather, and travel-worn wool. By now, the first pilgrims are stirring. They sit up slowly, stretching sore muscles, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Some speak quietly in their own tongues, others murmur prayers. A few glance toward the door, eager to set out early to cover more ground before the sun rises too high. You move among them with a basket of bread and a pot of thin broth, ladling it into wooden bowls. The bread is coarse, the broth little more than water with a few shreds of cabbage, but it warms the body for the road ahead. Most take it without complaint. They have eaten worse on the journey. As they eat, you collect the bedding rough woolen blankets that will need airing in the yard. Some are damp from the chill of the night, others stiff with dust. You hang them over the wooden rails to catch the morning sun. The wind carries the sound of the church bell calling the faithful to lauds. By the time the pilgrims shoulder their packs and take up their walking staves, the hall is nearly empty. You stand in the doorway, watching them disappear down the road one by one, their scallop shells swinging from their cloaks, the badge of Santiago pilgrims. The road stretches toward the horizon, a pale ribbon between fields and low hills. When the last of them is gone, you turn back to the hostel. There are floors to scrub, dishes to wash, and the constant work of keeping the place ready for the next wave of travelers. The road never stops sending them merchants, peasants, nobles, beggars, all walking the same path, each with their own reason for seeking the saint's shrine. And you think, as you sweep the doorway once more, that you will never see Santiago yourself. But perhaps, in the steps of the people you have sheltered, a small part of you is carried there all the same. By late morning, the sun has climbed high enough to warm the slate roof of the hostel. The frost is gone, replaced by the smell of wet earth where the pilgrims' boots have tracked in mud from the road. You have finished scrubbing the wooden tables with a rag dipped in lye water when you hear the muffled sound of voices outside, growing louder. A new group has arrived. You step into the yard to see them. 6 in all, their clothes layered and worn, dust clinging to their hems. One man leans heavily on a staff, his foot bound in cloth. A woman carries a basket with a sleeping child, the baby's head tucked under a woolen shawl. They are tired, but their eyes brighten when they see the hostel door open. First comes the welcome. You take their names or what they choose to give and record them in the ledger kept for the bishop's records. This is not for taxation, but for proof that the hostel has served its purpose, to shelter those on the road for the glory of the saint. Next, you offer water from the jar for drinking and washing, and lead them to the benches where they can set down their burdens. Shoes and cloaks are removed first. Some smell strongly of the road, damp wool, leather stiff with sweat, the faint rot of soaked boots dried too slowly. You point them toward the washing basin in the yard, where they splash their faces and hands, sighing with relief at the cold water. The kitchen fire is kept burning throughout the day, but now you add more wood, the dry logs crackling as the flames catch. The meal for midday is thicker than the morning broth, lentils stewed with onions, flavored with a small scrap of salted pork. You ladle it into bowls and pass them out with slices of coarse rye bread. The pilgrims eat slowly, speaking little at first, then more as the food warms them. They speak in different accents, one man's French so heavy you catch only half his meaning, another woman's Castilian clear and quick. While they eat, you take their bedding from the storage chest. The blankets are not new, but they are clean, and the straw pallets have been freshly turned. You set them out along the hall, each place marked by a folded blanket and a small oil lamp for the night. One of the men offers to help with chores in return for his meal. You hand him a broom and he begins sweeping the courtyard while you tend to the washing. The pilgrim's laundry is always the same. Shirts stiff with salt from sweat, stockings worn thin at the heels, sometimes cloaks that smell of smoke from nights spent in the open. You scrub them at the trough, the icy water numbing your hands. They will dry by evening if the sun holds. By mid-afternoon, the hall has grown quieter. The child sleeps on a pallet, the woman resting beside him. 2 of the men have gone to the small chapel next door to pray. The injured traveler sits with his foot propped on a stool while you unwrap the bandage. The skin beneath is raw, rubbed open by days of walking. You wash it gently and apply a salve made from goose fat and herbs. He winces, but thanks you softly. Outside, the road is never empty. You see other travelers pass by, traders with mules, a group of soldiers on horseback, a lone boy driving a flock of geese. Not all are pilgrims, but all follow the same route westward, toward Santiago or beyond. The road is a thread binding together the lives of strangers, each not a night's rest in a place like yours. As evening approaches, you step outside to bring in the laundry, now dry and stiff from the sun. You fold each piece and place it at the foot of its owner's pallet. The pilgrims will need them tomorrow when the road calls them onward. And you think, as you watch the sky shift toward gold, that the road belongs as much to those who keep its shelters as to those who walk it. Without the steady work of hands like yours, the journey might still be made, but it would be colder, hungrier, and far lonelier. The last light of day falls across the yard as you carry in the final bucket of water. The pilgrims are gathered in the hall, some seated at the long table, others stretched out on their pallets with their eyes half closed. The smell of wood smoke and stew fills the room, comforting in its familiarity. Supper is a simpler affair than midday, a pot of cabbage and turnip stew, thickened with barley, served with bread softened in the broth. You move between the table and the hearth, ladling portions, refilling bowls, keeping the fire fed with smaller logs so the heat stays steady. Outside, The road grows quiet except for the occasional jingle of a mule's harness or the bark of a distant dog. Once the bowls are cleared, the pilgrims speak more freely. Stories spill out across the table of storms on the Bay of Biscay, of thieves on the roads near Pamplona, of visions and blessings claimed along the way. The child, now awake, plays with a scallop shell tied to his mother's cloak, the symbol that marks her as bound for Santiago. You listen, nodding when addressed, but your hands are busy with the evening chores. The water jars must be refilled for morning, the ashes raked from the hearth, the floors swept once more to keep the rushes clean for the night. One of the pilgrims, the man with the injured foot, offers to trim the lamp wicks, a task you gladly pass to him. Soon the small oil lamps flicker to life along the hall, their light soft and golden against the rough plaster walls. Before bed, the pilgrims gather in the chapel for Compline. The prayers are sung in Latin, the voices uneven but sincere. You stand in the doorway, listening to the words you have heard countless times, watching the lamplight flicker over bowed heads. The sound carries into the night air, mingling with the faint scent of incense. Back in the hall, you make a final round. You check the door's iron latch, ensuring it's secure against the cold and any unwelcome visitors. You cover the embers in the hearth with ash so they will smolder until morning. You place a small jug of water near the injured man's bed, knowing the pain in his foot may wake him before dawn. When at last the lamps are extinguished one by one, the hall settles into quiet. The only sounds are the soft breathing of those asleep, the creak of the rafters, and the wind against the shutters. You lie down on your own narrow pallet in the small corner allotted to you, the day's work still in your bones. You will rise before the first bell again tomorrow. The faces in the hall will be different, the stories new, but the work will be the same. You will fetch the water, sweep the floor, tend the fire, cook the meals, and see the travelers on their way. As you close your eyes, you think of the long road stretching westward under the moonlight, and of the many feet that walk it. Your own steps may never carry you to Santiago, but in every pilgrim who passes through your hands, a part of you travels there, and perhaps, in some small way, you arrive too. Story 6. Salt in the Step. The dawn wind moves over the steppe like a cold hand, flattening the grass in long ripples. You pull your fur-lined cap lower over your ears and tighten the leather strap beneath your chin. Around you, the salt caravan is waking the low grunts of camels rising with the scent of dung smoke from the night's fire. You have been a salt trader for 3 years now, though the roots are far older than any one man's memory. The Mongol Empire stretches across a continent, and with it stretches the demand for salt. In the cities along the Silk Road, merchants will pay in silver, grain, or cloth for the fine white crystals you carry. In smaller villages, they will trade livestock or felt. The salt is not only for seasoning, it preserves meat through long winters, cures hides, and keeps herds healthy. Without it, even the richest herder cannot endure. Your wagon stands ready, its wooden wheels creaking as you load the last sacks. Each sack is sewn shut with hemp cord, the salt inside fine and dry from the pans at the lake's edge. The camels kneel patiently as their loads are secured with ropes and balanced against their humps. Each animal carries 2 large sacks, the weight swaying with their slow, deliberate steps. The caravan leader, a man named Bortai with a voice like a drum, calls for departure. The camels rise in a chorus of groans, their long necks swinging. The line begins to move westward, away from the pale shimmer of the salt lake, toward the horizon where the grass meets the sky. You take your place alongside the second wagon, a long staff in your hand for urging the animals forward when they falter. By mid-morning, the sun is a pale disk behind high clouds. The steppe is flat here, broken only by the occasional mound where marmots watch from their burrows. The wind never stops. It presses against your cheekbones, carrying the faint tang of salt from the sacks. The caravan moves at the pace of the slowest camel, steady, unhurried. The road is only a track worn into the grass, marked now and then by the blackened circles of old campfires. When the caravan halts for the midday rest, You join the others in circling the wagons to block the wind. A fire is lit, the smoke streaming sideways. You eat hard bread softened in tea, the heat from the cup seeping into your fingers. A fellow trader, Arslan, speaks of the markets in Samarkand, how the price of salt there has risen after a harsh winter. The news is good. It means your journey will be worth the trouble. After the meal, you walk the line of camels, checking the ropes for fraying. A loose knot can spill a sack into the grass, where the wind will scatter its contents before anyone notices. You tighten two straps and adjust the balance on a younger camel still learning the road. Its wide eyes follow you as you move away. The afternoon is longer, the horizon unchanged. Clouds thicken and the wind sharpens. You pull your cloak tighter, thinking of the night ahead. The caravan will stop near a stream if Bortai's reckoning of the route is correct, and the animals will drink before the frost sets in. Water is as vital as salt, and every stop is chosen with care. As the light fades, the ground begins to rise into low hills. The caravan slows, the camel's hooves striking harder earth. At last you see the thin line of willows that marks the stream. The animals are unladen, the sacks stacked in a circle around the camp. Fires are lit, and the smell of boiling mutton drifts on the wind. You sit with your bowl, the steam curling upward, watching the shadows grow long over the grass. The day's journey has covered only a small fraction of the distance to the markets, but there is no haste. The salt has waited in the earth for centuries. It can wait a few more weeks to change hands. And as you lie down beneath your felt blanket, the cold already creeping in, you wonder, when the Empire's banners no longer fly over these plains, will the salt still find its way from lake to market, carried by men and camels against the wind? The morning begins with frost clinging to the ropes and the edges of the felt blankets. Your breath clouds in the air as you help load the camels. The salt sacks, though heavy, are dry and crisp from the cold, the fabric tightening around them. The camels grumble as the ropes are pulled taut, their broad feet shifting on the frozen ground. Bortai gives the signal and the caravan sets off once more, the sound of hooves and wagon wheels muffled under the thin crust of frost. The sky is pale blue, the sun still low, casting long shadows across the grasslands. The wind has eased for now, but the steppe is never still for long. The road westward is marked by nothing more than memory and habit, no signposts, no stone markers, only the knowledge passed from one trader to the next. You count the low hills, note the turn of the stream, recall the curve of the distant ridges. These landmarks guide the caravan as surely as any map. By midday, the wind returns, sharp and dry, carrying with it a thin veil of dust. You pull your scarf across your mouth and nose. The camels blink slowly into the gusts, their pace unchanged. Salt dust sifts from the sacks in tiny white grains, catching in the folds of your cloak. It will stay there until you brush it away at camp or until the next gust carries it off again. The midday halt is brief. There is no water here, only a shallow depression where the grass grows sparse. The wagons are drawn into a half circle to block the wind, and small fires are lit in iron braziers. You chew dried mutton and drink hot tea laced with a pinch of salt, a habit in the steppe to keep the body steady against the cold. As you sit, Arslan tells of his uncle's caravan, ambushed years ago near the edge of the desert. The attackers were not after gold or silver, but the salt itself, valuable enough to fight over, light enough to carry off. It is a reminder to all of you that while the steppe is vast and empty, it is never entirely safe. In the afternoon, you take a turn walking ahead of the caravan. The ground here slopes gently downward, the horizon opening wide. From this vantage, you can see a faint column of smoke in the far distance. Bortai spots it too, raising his hand to shade his eyes. It could be a herder's camp. It could also be riders whose intentions are uncertain. By the time you make camp that evening, the smoke has faded into the horizon's haze. The chosen site is a low hollow near a cluster of rocks. The camels are unladen and led to a narrow stream for water. You work with two others to set the sacks in a protective ring, a habit as much about order as about security. The fires burn low tonight, the wind restless. A watch is set in shifts, 2 men at a time, circling the camp slowly, listening for the sound of hoofbeats beyond the wind. You take the second watch. The cold bites through your cloak and the stars overhead burn bright and sharp. From the far edge of camp, you can see the pale mounds of the salt sacks in the firelight. They are silent, unmoving, yet they carry with them the labor of those who dug them from the lake, the promise of trade, and the unspoken rule that salt must move, no matter the season or the empire's fortune. When your watch ends, you return to your blanket, the smell of smoke in your hair. Sleep comes quickly, though your dreams are full of white plains and endless wind. And you wonder, before the cold takes you fully, is it the salt we carry across the steppe, or is it the steppe itself, packed into sacks, crossing from one horizon to another? The final stretch begins under a lowering sky. The wind is behind you now, pushing at your back as the caravan crests a long rise and the plain begins to break into rolling hills. Somewhere beyond those hills lies the city, not the largest in the empire, but large enough to have stone walls, watchtowers, and a market square busy enough to swallow a caravan whole. The salt sacks are lighter than when you began, not from loss but from compression. Weeks of travel have settled the grains into denser weight. The ropes have been retied again and again, rubbed smooth by the shifting load. Your hands are calloused from the daily tightening and loosening, the knot work you could now perform in your sleep. By midday, you pass a small herder's camp, round felt tents ringed by grazing sheep. A few children run alongside the caravan, calling out greetings and pointing toward the west. One of them offers a strip of dried curd in exchange for a pinch of salt. Bortai agrees, and the trade is made in seconds. Even here, in the middle of the steppe, the white crystals are worth their weight in food. The road becomes more defined as you near the city. Wheel ruts packed into the earth, the grass worn away by years of traders passing. You smell smoke long before you see the walls, the scent of cooking fires and forgework mingling on the wind. Then, in the late afternoon, the walls themselves appear, a line of gray stone rising from the plain, crowned with wooden watchtowers. At the outer gate, the caravan halts. The gate guards approach, their fur-lined helmets pulled low. One examines the sacks while another checks Bortai's travel papers, a single sheet bearing the seal of the local governor. There is no tax on salt this season, though the guards ask for a gift of a small sack for their own table. Bortai, practiced in such exchanges, hands it over without argument. Inside the walls, the noise changes. Hooves ring on cobbles, merchants call out from their stalls, and the smell of spices and roasting meat replaces the open scent of the grasslands. The caravan moves slowly through the narrow streets toward the market quarter. Here, the salt will be divided, some sold directly to city traders, some to caravan masters heading farther west, and some reserved for the governor's storehouses. You help unload the first wagons, stacking the sacks under a covered awning. The buyers arrive quickly, men in layered robes, women with scales and small weights to measure out purchases. Coins change hands, contracts are spoken aloud and witnessed by scribes. The pace is fast, the language a mix of tongues from across the empire, but the trade is steady. By nightfall, the caravan is lighter, the camels standing with their loads gone, chewing contentedly on nosebags of grain. You sit on the edge of the market square, eating a bowl of hot noodles bought from a street vendor with your share of the day's pay. The warmth seeps into your fingers, and you watch the remaining sacks being locked away for the night. Tomorrow, some of the salt will still be here. Most of it, though, will already be on the move again, carried to kitchens, to curing sheds, to leather workshops, to the distant garrisons that guard the empire's edges. The journey never truly ends, it only changes hands. As the market quiets and the city lamps are lit, you think of the lake far to the east, its surface white and gleaming under the sun. The salt waits there, as it always has, for someone to dig it up, pack it tight, and carry it across the endless grass. And you realize that long after the names of khans and governors fade, the salt will still travel, and men like you will still follow the old tracks, chasing the horizon. Story 7. Measuring Shadows in Babylon. The city wakes slowly under the weight of the morning heat. Even at dawn, Babylon's walls glow faintly in the low light, their baked bricks holding the warmth of yesterday. From your small chamber near the temple precinct, you step into the open courtyard, carrying a slender bronze rod and a clay tablet wrapped in a damp cloth. The air smells of dust and the faint sweetness of dates ripening in the orchards beyond the walls. Your work is not loud or urgent, yet it shapes the rhythm of the city. You measure time by the movement of shadows. The temple employs you as one of its Shamshi, masters of the sun, though your skill is less in prophecy and more in calculation. The gnomon, the upright rod you carry, is your main instrument. Set in the proper place and observed with care, it tells you the hours of the day, the seasons of the year, and the subtle turning of the world. You cross the courtyard to the small, paved platform where the measuring marks are cut into the stone. The lines radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel, each one marked with a cuneiform sign. At the center is the socket where the bronze rod fits snugly. You set it in place, check its alignment against the eastern gate of the courtyard, and step back. The shadow is already stretching long toward the western marks. Before the sun climbs too high, you take your first measurement. With a reed stylus, you note the position of the shadow on your clay tablet, pressing the wedge-shaped marks with steady hands. The numbers are not simply for curiosity, they will be compared with records from years past to track the solstices, the equinoxes, and the lengthening or shortening of days. The temple uses this knowledge to set the dates for festivals, to advise farmers on planting, and to determine the proper hours for certain rituals. Around you, the temple compound comes to life. Priests in long white robes walk between the shrines, carrying baskets of offerings. Water carriers haul jars from the Euphrates to fill the basins in the courtyards. Somewhere in the distance, the bray of a donkey mingles with the calls of vendors setting up in the morning market. Your next task is to record the sun's altitude with the measuring staff, a long wooden rod marked with intervals. Standing at a fixed point, you sight along the rod to the tip of the gnomon's shadow and compare the angle to your reference marks. It is a simple procedure, but it must be done at the same times each day to keep the record unbroken. Even a gap of one day can disrupt the sequence. When the sun reaches its first quarter above the horizon, you take the second reading. The shadow has shortened, moving toward the midday point. You scratch the figures into the tablet and set it in the shade to keep the clay moist. Later, the records will be dried in the sun and stored in the temple archive shelves upon shelves of tablets, each one holding the shape of a shadow that fell years or decades before. By mid-morning, the heat begins to settle on your shoulders. You cover the gnomon's base with a small cloth to keep it from becoming too hot to touch. The work slows now, waiting for the sun to reach its zenith. You retreat to a shaded alcove, sipping from a cup of watered date wine, and watch the play of light on the courtyard walls. Measuring time in Babylon is not a task for haste. It is a conversation with the sky, drawn out over hours, answered in inches of shadow. The city around you moves to its own pace, the traders bargaining in the bazaar, the scribes copying contracts, the workers hauling bricks for a new section of wall. But here, in this quiet space, you and the sun keep a slower rhythm, one that stretches back to the first days when men learned to divide the year by the light. And as you wait for the next mark to pass under the shadow's edge, you wonder, when the bricks of Babylon crumble, will anyone still remember how to read the hours written on the ground by the sun? By the time the sun stands high above the courtyard, the heat lies heavy across the paving stones. The shadow of the gnomon has shrunk to its shortest point of the day, barely touching the innermost ring of the measuring marks. You wait in silence for the exact moment when it is smallest, the zenith, and then press the figure into your clay tablet. This number will join hundreds of others, part of a record that has been kept without interruption for generations. The temple scribes say the gods favor order, and the unbroken sequence of days is a form of offering. To break the record is to disrespect the divine pattern, so you tend it as carefully as a gardener tends the sacred date palms. After the zenith reading, you carry the tablet into the archive room. It is a cool, dim space lined with shelves of baked clay, each one holding dozens of tablets. The air smells faintly of dust and old reed mats. You set today's tablet on a low shelf to dry, next to others from this month, then take up yesterday's now hardened to copy into the ledger. The ledger is not a scroll, but another tablet, larger and thicker, into which the daily numbers are pressed in sequence. Each column represents a month, each row a day. The pattern that emerges is one you know well, the numbers slowly increasing as the days lengthen towards summer, then slowly shrinking as winter approaches. The changes are small from day to day, yet over months the shift is unmistakable. Once the figures are copied, you return to the courtyard for the afternoon readings. The sun's position is no longer overhead but tilting westward, the shadow lengthening again. You check the gnomon's alignment to ensure it has not shifted. Even a small tilt could throw off the calculations. Satisfied, you press the new measurements into a fresh clay tablet. From beyond the temple walls comes the low hum of the marketplace in full activity. The sound drifts into the courtyard, the calls of vendors selling grain and oil, the bleating of sheep brought for sale, the clatter of pottery being stacked. The work of the city moves in its own rhythm, tied to the needs of trade and harvest, but beneath it all is the hidden pulse. You measure the steady heartbeat of the sun's path. Later in the day, a junior apprentice arrives carrying a jar of cool water and a handful of fresh reeds for your stylus. He sits beside you, watching as you mark the shadow's position. You explain the significance of this hour, how the afternoon shadow's length tells not just the time of day, but the time of year, for at certain seasons it will match exactly with morning readings. The apprentice nods, scratching notes onto a scrap of wax tablet for his own learning. As the sun dips lower, the shadow stretches toward the far western line on the pavement. This is your final outdoor reading for the day. You record it, then gently lift the bronze gnomon from its socket and wrap it in a cloth. The courtyard will be swept by the evening attendants, but your marks will remain until the next dawn, when the whole process begins again. In the temple's small workroom, you set the day's last tablet to dry and close the ledger for the evening. Your hands are stained with clay dust, your fingertips marked with tiny grooves from the reed stylus. The work is quiet and repetitive, yet you know that without it, the temple's festival calendar would drift, the planting times would shift, and the city's order would fray. The sun may move in silence, but in its shadow, you keep the city's time. And as the cool of evening finally seeps into the streets, you wonder, when the world changes and these walls fall silent, will the shadow still fall the same way, waiting for someone to read it again? The evening air carries a faint breeze from the Euphrates, cooling the temple courtyard at last. You've put away the bronze gnomon and closed the day's ledger, yet there is one final duty, transferring the finished tablets to the deep archive. The deep archive lies beneath the main ziggurat, down a narrow staircase lit by oil lamps. The walls are lined with shelves of baked clay, each stacked with tablets wrapped in reed mats to keep the dust from settling into their marks. Some tablets here were pressed before your grandfather's time, their wedge-shaped signs still sharp despite the years. You set today's record among the most recent shelf, then pause to examine one from over a century ago. The numbers are familiar, but they are not yours, the shadow lengths recorded by men whose names are no longer spoken. Yet their work remains exact, their hands steady even after decades in the dark. You feel a quiet kinship with them, an unbroken chain of watchers keeping the same account of the same sun. When you return to the courtyard, the temple's evening rituals are beginning. Priests carry braziers of incense toward the inner sanctuary, the smoke curling into the warm twilight. The chants rise and fall in slow waves, marking the day's passage into night. You stand at the edge of the paving stones where the gnomon stood this morning, imagining the shadow it will cast tomorrow, beginning again in the east. As darkness deepens, you walk through the market quarter on your way home. The stalls are closing, merchants counting coins by lamplight. In one corner, a potter's apprentice sweeps the day's dust into the street. In another, a scribe dips his brush for one last stroke on a customer's receipt. None of them look at the sky, yet their days are shaped by it all the same: the hours of business, the seasons of trade, the timing of the great festivals. At home, you eat a simple meal of bread and dates, washed down with watered beer. The window looks west toward the city wall, now a dark silhouette against the last streaks of color in the sky. You think of the sun already sinking beyond the horizon, its light traveling far from Babylon, yet destined to return along the same path tomorrow. In the stillness, it occurs to you that your work is less about measuring time than about remembering it. Each mark on the clay is a promise that the day was seen, recorded, and added to the long memory of the city. The pattern matters more than the moment, the endless repetition that outlives kings, wars, and even the walls themselves. When you finally lie down to sleep, the night is warm, and the hum of the city fades into silence. Somewhere in the temple archive, your marks dry into permanence, and you know that tomorrow at dawn you will stand again in the courtyard, waiting for the first shadow to fall across the stone, because in Babylon, as in the rest of the world, the sun writes the hours, and your task is only to read them. Story 8. Hauling water for Versailles. The palace still sleeps when you begin your work. The grand avenues leading to Versailles are quiet in the pre-dawn gloom, and the air smells faintly of wet earth and wood smoke. Behind the shimmering facade known to courtiers and ambassadors, there is a world of hidden labor, and in that world, water is everything. Versailles is a place of spectacle, and nothing dazzles visitors quite like the fountains. They leap and spray in intricate patterns, catching the sunlight in arcs of silver. But the truth behind them is less elegant. The gardens sit high above the nearest natural water sources, and every drop must be coaxed, carried, and forced through an elaborate network of pipes. Without constant labor, the fountains would fall silent before the king had finished his morning promenade. You are part of the pumping crew, a corps of men stationed at the great machine that drives water uphill from the Seine. Your day begins in the damp shadows beneath the palace gardens, in a vaulted chamber filled with the smell of oil, iron, and river water. The machine de Marly, as it is called, is a marvel of engineering. 14 massive water wheels set in the river, turning an array of wooden pistons that push water through lead pipes toward Versailles. It groans and shudders as it comes to life, the creak of timbers mixing with the thud of gears. Your task is to keep the pumps working smoothly, clearing debris from the intakes, checking the valve seals, and making sure the wheel axles are greased. In the half-light of lanterns, you wade into the shallows to pull weeds and river muck from the grates. The cold water seeps through your boots, numbing your feet, but there's no time to dwell on it. Each moment the intake is blocked means less water reaching the upper basins. By mid-morning, the overseer sends a runner with the day's orders from the palace, which fountains will run and when. The most spectacular, the Latona fountain, the Dragon fountain, the massive Neptune basin, are reserved for times when the king is watching. Smaller fountains may be left dry to save pressure. Even with the great machine's output, there is never enough water to run them all at once. The orders are relayed up the hill by a series of signal flags and bells, guiding teams of gardeners and fountainmen who open and close valves hidden among the hedges. From your post far below, you cannot see the play of water above, but you can feel it. The sudden drop in pressure when the Grand Canal is fed, the tremor in the pipes when a valve is thrown wide. When the first set of fountains is scheduled to run, you push the pump teams to full output. The water surges through the lead pipes, groaning and hissing as it climbs the long ascent. Somewhere above, the gardens come alive, jets leaping in sync with the king's walk, cascades glittering as courtiers murmur their admiration. Down here, your satisfaction comes not from beauty but from flow, a steady, unbroken rush that means the system is holding. In the lulls between runs, you tend to the maintenance tasks, tightening the iron bands that hold the pipe joints, scraping lime deposits from the fittings, checking the gear teeth for cracks. You work with tools worn smooth from decades of handling, their wooden grips darkened with oil and sweat. The machine's rhythm becomes your own, the steady clack of pistons, the hiss of water, the occasional shouts of men over the roar. The smell of lunch drifts down from the workers' hut, bread, cheese, and salted pork. You eat quickly, perched on an overturned bucket, the damp chill of the chamber settling into your bones. The palace above is all gilt and silk, but here, the work is constant, practical, and utterly essential. Without it, the grand illusion of Versailles would vanish in minutes. As the afternoon approaches and the next fountain run is signaled, you wonder, does the king ever think of the river that feeds his gardens, or of the men ankle-deep in cold water, coaxing that river uphill? The mid-afternoon sun bakes the riverbank, though down in the pump-house, the air remains damp and cool. The machine de Marly is at full strain now, its 14 water wheels spinning with relentless purpose. Each one drives a series of wooden pump rods that extend up the hillside in stages, like the bones of a giant reaching toward the palace. From your post on the lower platform, you watch the crankshafts turn, each stroke sending a measured gulp of river water into the main pipes. The sound is hypnotic, the creak of beams, the rhythmic thump of pistons, the occasional groan when the load shifts. To an untrained ear, it might sound chaotic, but you can hear the balance, the small irregularities that tell you when a wheel is lagging or a valve is sticking. A boy in a patched linen shirt comes running with a message from the upper reservoirs. The Latona fountain is to run at full height in exactly 1/4 hour. The king has decided to stroll in that direction, and the gardeners above are scrambling to align the show. That means you have to push the pumps to their highest capacity without bursting the pipes, a delicate balance between force and restraint. You give the signal to the other pump teams along the bank. They lean into their work, adjusting the governor weights, greasing the pump heads, listening for the hiss of escaping water that might betray a weak joint. Every man knows that a leak in the main line could rob the fountain of its grandeur at the worst possible moment. As the pressure builds, you can almost picture the scene above. The wide gravel paths, the precise geometry of trimmed hedges, the marble statues gleaming in the sunlight. The Latona fountain, with its tiered basins and sculpted frogs spouting arcs of water, is the centerpiece of this view. To the courtiers, it seems a miracle of art and nature. To you, it is a matter of careful measurement, pipe diameters, valve timings, and the sheer endurance of the pumping crews. The order comes through, Latona flowing. You ease the pressure just enough to prevent a blowout, holding it steady for as long as the display lasts. The minutes stretch. Your shoulders ache from leaning over the control wheel, but you can't let your attention slip. At last, the recall signal is given, and you slowly release the strain. The water's roar softens, the pipes settle back to their usual hiss. There is a brief lull. You take the opportunity to walk the length of the pump gallery, inspecting each wheel's axle. The smell of wet oak and iron is strong here, mingled with the faint tang of lead from the pipes. In one corner, a blacksmith's apprentice hammers out a new coupling ring, his work illuminated by a single shaft of sunlight through the high window. From the upper basin, another order arrives, this time for the Dragon Fountain. It's a smaller display, but it requires a sudden burst of pressure to send the water leaping high above the carved serpent's head. You make the adjustments almost by instinct now, the rhythm of the day guiding your hands. By late afternoon, you've learned which of the day's displays were most successful. A gardener passing through tells you the Latona's spray was as high as a man on horseback, and the dragon's jet sparkled like glass in the sunlight. You allow yourself a small smile, not pride exactly, but a quiet satisfaction that the hidden work held steady under the king's gaze. The sun is sinking by the time the last orders are given. Some fountains will run in the evening light, but others will be shut down to conserve water for tomorrow. You turn the valves with a sense of release. the machine's great muscles relaxing after a long day's labor. As you step outside into the golden dusk, the palace gardens are too far to see. All that reaches you is the faint murmur of falling water and the distant strains of music from the royal apartments. You wonder if anyone there, hearing the fountains play, imagines the creaking wheels and dripping galleries that made the sound possible. And you ask yourself, when the great machine finally stops, will the gardens fall silent forever, or will someone find another way to make the water climb? Night is settling over Versailles when the last valves close. The fountains above still glimmer faintly in the torchlight, but one by one, their voices fade. By the time the gardens are quiet, the machine de Marly is slowing to its rest, the wheels turning more lazily, the pumps no longer under strain. The sudden absence of the pounding rhythm is strange, like the palace itself has stopped breathing. You remain for a while in the pump house, listening to the last drips of water into the collection cistern. The smell of damp wood is stronger now that the air is still. A lamp flickers in the corner, casting shifting shadows across the gear teeth. Without the machine in motion, the chamber feels larger, but also somehow emptier, as if its purpose vanishes the moment the flow stops. Your crew works by lamplight, wiping down the pump rods with oil to keep the wood from swelling overnight. The blacksmith's apprentice delivers the newly forged coupling ring to be installed in the morning. In another corner, a man is carefully chipping away lime scale from a pipe joint, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap echoing softly. These end-of-day tasks are as important as the pumping itself. Without them, the system would slowly grind itself to ruin. When your part is done, you climb the long slope toward the palace. The path winds past reservoirs and holding basins, each one a dark mirror under the stars. From here, you can see the outlines of the gardens, the precise symmetry of the parterres, the straight lines of the gravel walks. Somewhere in the darkness, gardeners are already trimming and sweeping, preparing for another day's display. The palace itself glows with candlelight. Through tall windows you glimpse a ballroom scene: silk gowns, powdered wigs, the flash of a violin bow. The guests move as if in a dream, unaware that the water which glittered for them hours earlier came at the cost of sweat, oil, and aching shoulders. You pass unnoticed along the service corridors, the hum of conversation fading as you leave the grand halls behind. At the workers' lodging, you find your bed, a simple cot in a shared room that smells of damp wool and worn leather. You remove your boots, still damp from the riverbank, and stretch out. The silence is deep here, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. You close your eyes, feeling the day's rhythm still in your body. The strain of the pump handles, the tremor of the pipes, the careful watch for signs of failure. You know that tomorrow will be the same: another set of orders from above, another delicate dance between pressure and restraint, another day spent in the shadow of the machine. But that is the work. The fountains may be the pride of Versailles, but they are only as constant as the hands that feed them. Somewhere in the stillness, you wonder how long this cycle will last. Machines wear out, rivers shift their course, kings grow old. But for now, the pipes will carry the river uphill, and the fountains will leap in the sunlight, and your place will remain at the edge of the water's long climb. Story 9. The Clerk Who Counted Ships in Amsterdam. The morning fog rolls in from the IJ, wrapping the masts in pale gray. From your window in the East India Company counting house, the harbor looks like a forest of bare winter trees, each mast swaying gently with the tide. You rise before the sun because the ships never sleep, and neither can the books. The counting house is a long, timbered room that smells faintly of salt, ink, and wool. Rows of tall desks line the walls, each one manned by a clerk with quill in hand. Above, the rafters creak as the building settles, and from the street below comes the rattle of cart wheels bringing goods from the docks. Your post is by the main ledger, the master record of ships entering and leaving the port. Each arrival and departure must be noted in precise detail. Ship name, tonnage, master's name, cargo type, date and time, and any special notes about condition or delay. It is not glamorous work, but it is the spine of Amsterdam's trading empire. Without these records, the company's network of merchants, warehouses, and creditors would be blind. You begin by reading the overnight entries left by the dockside watch. A flight named De Hoop arrived just past midnight from Batavia, carrying pepper, nutmeg, and cinnamon. Another, Het Hurt, departed for the Canary Islands at dawn with a hold full of herring. The handwriting of the night clerk is cramped but legible, a small mercy, given that these entries will be copied into the permanent books by week's end. From the street, the first dock runner arrives, breathless from the cold, handing you a folded slip of paper. It lists a new arrival, De Witt Valk, inbound from Lisbon with wine casks. You note the time, calculate the tide state at arrival, and mark the ship's position in the harbor so the unloading crews can be sent without delay. Beside you, a younger clerk is struggling with a blot of ink that is spread across the page. You remind him gently but firmly to keep his quill light and his sleeve out of the inkwell. The ledgers are meant to last decades. A careless mark today will still be seen by men who have not yet been born. Through the open door to the dockside balcony, you can hear the calls of sailors and stevedores. Cranes creak as they swing heavy barrels onto the quay. The air is thick with smells, tar, wet rope, and the sharp spice of pepper dust. It is tempting to linger and watch the bustle, but the ledger demands attention. Every ship unloaded must match its manifest. Every manifest must match the customs tally. By mid-morning, the fog begins to lift, revealing a sky the color of pewter. The masts stand in sharper relief now, and you can count more than 30 vessels anchored or moored along the quay. Some are here only briefly, waiting for tide or cargo. Others will stay for weeks while repairs are made. The sheer volume of movement is staggering, yet every detail must be captured before memory fades. A messenger from the Shipwrights Guild stops by with news of a vessel under repair de Gode Hoop, whose departure date will be delayed by 3 days due to hull damage. You amend the outbound list accordingly, knotting the change so the buyers expecting its cargo will not be caught unawares. The hours slip by in steady rhythm. Ink, sand, fold, stamp, seal. It is not exciting work, but there is satisfaction in its order. The harbor is chaos, but in your books it becomes a sequence of lines and numbers, a story that can be read in decades to come. As the noon bell approaches, you pause to stretch your fingers. Outside, the harbor is louder now, the tide turning and the wind shifting. More ships are moving, more cargo is shifting, and you know the afternoon will bring a new wave of entries. And you wonder as you dip your quill again how many ships a man can count in a lifetime, and whether the number will matter when the sea always brings more. The noon bell from the Westerkirk rolls across the rooftops as you finish a tally for De Witt Valk's wine shipment. Lunch for the clerks is brief bread and cheese from a cloth-wrapped parcel, eaten while standing at the tall desks. Outside, the harbor has shed its morning quiet. The tide has risen, and with it, the movement of ships. Through the open shutters, the afternoon light glints off the water. You see the first of the big East Indiamen edging toward her berth, a square-rigged giant, her sides streaked with the salt of months at sea. The dock watch will take her first declaration, but you will soon have the manifest in your hands, and every barrel, bale, and chest must be accounted for in the master book. The arrival sets the whole counting house in motion. Younger clerks run between desks with slips of figures, errand boys clatter down the stairs toward the quay, and the company's inspectors stride in with damp coats and brisk voices. A manifest is spread across your desk, its pages smelling faintly of spice and mildew. You note the cargo: pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, porcelain, silk, and a small consignment of tin ingots. Every figure is checked against the ship's own list, then against the customs records. Any discrepancy, even a missing chest of cinnamon, must be marked for inquiry. You send a note to the warehouse master: 3 casks of nutmeg to be held under lock until the board reviews their destination. Nutmeg is valuable, and its theft is as quick as a loose stave in a barrel. A single missing cask could mean days of investigation. As you work, a dispute breaks out at the far desk. Two junior clerks are arguing over the name of a ship. One insists it is De Vriendschap, the other claims De Vrede. Both are working from copies of copies, smudged and hurriedly written. You leave your station to settle it, consulting the inbound ship list posted on the wall. The name is De Vriendschap, and you point to the record in the clear, looping script of the harbor master. The younger clerks nod, embarrassed, and return to their work. By mid-afternoon, the room smells of drying ink and the faint sweetness of imported goods. A trader from the Baltic office stops in, requesting confirmation of a timber shipment from Riga. You find the entry the vessel sent, Pieter, arrived 5 days ago with planks stacked high in her hold, and make him a certified copy for the city's records. From the quay, a sudden shout draws your attention. You step to the balcony in time to see two stevedores arguing over a crate that has split open, spilling porcelain bowls onto the planks. Some are cracked, others whole but rattling dangerously close to the water's edge. The foreman bellows for order, and men rush to gather the pieces. You make a note in the day's incident log. Breakage during unloading goods to be inspected for damage before warehousing. Such details will matter when insurance claims are filed. The sun is low by the time the last of the day's arrivals are recorded. A small coaster from Antwerp slides into the inner harbor, her captain looking weary from the upriver journey. He hands you a brief manifest, mostly woolens and salted meat, and you copy the details before sending him to the customs office. Inside, the counting house has begun to quiet. The younger clerks sand their pages, stacking them for binding. You close the master ledger for the day, its weight solid in your hands, and return it to its locked cabinet. The book is more than paper, it is the city's memory, written one line at a time. But as you leave for the evening, stepping into the cool harbor air, you can already hear the creak of lines and the slap of water against hulls. New ships are waiting at anchor for the morning tide, and tomorrow the ledger will open again. And you can't help but ask yourself, when you are gone, will the lines you wrote still speak to anyone, or will they be as silent as the ships once they've sailed? The harbor wakes before you do. By the time you arrive at the counting house the next morning, the air is already filled with the sounds of chains rattling, gulls crying, and ship bells marking the hour. The tide has turned, and with it, the night's arrivals are sliding into their berths. You begin the day with the outbound register. Several ships are set to depart on the noon tide. De Walcheren bound for the Cape of Good Hope, De Jonge Prins sailing to Smyrna with cloth and timber, and Het Hert once more outward bound, this time toward the Baltic. For each, you write the departure time, cargo type, and intended port, then pass the slip to the harbor watch so they can match it against the physical inspection before casting off. The work is unhurried but steady. Every entry must be legible, every number checked twice. An error here can ripple across the trading network. A buyer in Batavia expecting goods that never left Amsterdam. A shipper in Hamburg charging for cargo never received. By mid-morning, the wind shifts and the harbor comes alive again. Sails bloom along the masts, cranes creak as they lift barrels into holds, and the narrow lanes between warehouses ring with the calls of dockworkers moving goods in carts. From your high window, you watch the ebb and flow, but it is the paper tide on your desk that matters most. A letter arrives from the directors, instructing that a special tally be kept for the next month on all shipments of coffee and tea. Rumors in the marketplace suggest prices may rise sharply, and the company wants to monitor the flow. You set up a separate ledger, neat and spare, leaving space for any notes on quality, breakage, or delay. Not long after, an unexpected problem arises. The manifest for the St. Jan shows 40 barrels of herring, but the customs tally lists only 39. You dispatch a junior clerk to the quay, instructing him to count the barrels himself. Hours later, he returns with the answer. One barrel had broken during loading and was discarded without being recorded. You make the correction, marking the reason in the margin. It is a small error, but one that proves the value of the ledgers without them. Such discrepancies could slip unnoticed. The afternoon wears on. A small brig from Hamburg arrives with a cargo of rye and hemp. A ketch from London brings iron tools and barrels of beer. A single-masted hooker slides into port from Friesland, its hold crammed with cheese wheels wrapped in linen. Each vessel is a line in the book, each line a fragment of the city's lifeblood. Toward evening, you close the day's entries and run your fingers over the filled pages. The ink is dry, the sand brushed away, the paper smooth beneath your hand. You think of the older ledgers stored in the archive, thick volumes from decades past, their pages brown with age. The handwriting changes over time, the ship names shift. The cargoes vary with the fortunes of trade, but the pattern is the same. Arrival, departure, goods, notes. It occurs to you that the work you do is not just for the company's directors or the city's merchants. It is for the future, for the historian, the curious descendant, the stranger who will one day open a book in some quiet room and see your neat lines. They will know, on a certain day in a certain year, which ships came and went, what they carried, and perhaps even why it mattered. The harbor outside is growing quiet now. The masts are still, the water dark. You blow out your lamp, close the counting house door, and step into the narrow street. The ledger is locked behind you, its pages heavy with the day's movement. And you wonder, as you walk home in the fading light, if the sea will always bring ships to count, or if there will come a day when the ledger is closed for the last time. Story 10. The Shepherd Who Measured the Nile. The air over the river is heavy with heat, the kind that makes the horizon ripple. You stand barefoot on the dry bank, the cracked earth beneath your toes telling you the Nile has not yet risen. Behind you, the sheep graze lazily among the scrub, their bleating slow and intermittent in the stillness of midday. Every year is the same, the long wait for the flood. The village depends on it, and so does your flock, though the animals do not know it. Without the water's arrival, the grass will not grow thick in the fields, and the store jars in your home will stand empty. Your duty is not just to tend the sheep, but also to watch the river. You have learned the skill from your father, who learned it from his father before him, to measure the Nile's rise using the carved stone pillar in the small, roofless chamber at the river's edge. It is a nilometer, though you did not know that word until a scribe used it one day in conversation. To you, it is simply the measuring pillar. The chamber is cool compared to the open bank, the stone smelling faintly of water and silt. The pillar's sides are marked with deep lines and ancient numbers. When the flood begins, the water creeps up these markings day by day, and you record the height on a clay tablet with a reed stylus. The work seems dull to some after all. The river will rise whether you measure it or not, but the elders insist the numbers matter. Too low, and the harvest will be poor. Too high, and the flood will wash away the young plants before they can root. The temple priests use your measurements to set the calendar for planting and to decide the size of the grain tax for the year. In the afternoon, a breeze carries the smell of far-off rain. You scan the upstream bend, but the water's surface is still. The flood always comes from the south, from rains in lands you have never seen. Traders speak of mountains, forests, and lakes where the river begins, but these are as distant to you as the stars. What you know is the slope of the bank, the bend of the reeds, and the way the water changes color when the silt arrives. A boy from the village runs to fetch you. The headman wants to know today's reading. You take the tablet and stylus, descend the worn steps into the measuring chamber, and bend to see the faint shimmer at the pillar's base. You mark the line, 2 hands lower than the same day last year. The boy frowns when you tell him. He knows what it means: a later planting, a longer wait for fresh grain. By evening, the sheep are gathered into their pen, and the sky glows red above the western hills. You sit on the low wall, watching the river darken in the fading light. Somewhere far upstream, rains may already be falling, the drops joining streams that will become the flood. But here, the bank is dry and the measure is low. And you wonder, as you scratch one last mark on the tablet, if this year, The water will rise enough to feed both the fields and your flock. The next morning the air feels different. The wind from the south carries a dampness you cannot see but can taste. The sheep are restless, nibbling only briefly before lifting their heads toward the river. You've learned to trust their instincts. Sometimes they sense the flood before the water is even in sight. Your first task is to walk to the nilometer. The stone steps are slick with a faint sheen, though no rain has fallen here. The pillar stands patient and unmoving, its carved marks worn by generations of eyes and hands. At its base, the water has risen by the width of your palm since yesterday. You scratch the new height onto your clay tablet, careful not to smudge the previous entries. The numbers form a slow climb, each one a rung toward the flood's peak. A scribe from the temple arrives later in the morning. His robe is plain linen, but his reed pen is trimmed to a perfect point. He inspects your readings without greeting, nods once, and writes the numbers into his papyrus scroll. He will carry them to the priests, who will stand before the god Happy's altar and announce whether the people can expect a generous flood or a meager one. You have never been inside the temple, but you've heard how the priests speak of the river as if it were a living being with moods and intentions. Back in the fields, you pass an old farmer repairing the edge of his irrigation ditch. He pauses to ask your measure for the day. When you tell him, his brow furrows not low enough to worry him yet, but not high enough to make him relax. He mutters that last year's flood was just barely enough, and that another poor year will empty the granaries before spring. In the afternoon, you take the sheep upriver to graze near a shallow ford. The banks there are lined with papyrus reeds, their stalks rattling in the wind. You see driftwood caught among the reeds, a sign that the upstream current has begun to quicken. Your father once told you that the first debris often comes before the silt, as if the river is clearing its path for the true floodwaters to come. By sunset, the village is buzzing with talk. Some say the river rose more quickly near Elephantine. Others claim the rains in the Ethiopian highlands were heavy this year. These are rumors passed from boat to boat, and no one can say for certain. You have learned not to put much faith in words that travel faster than the water. That night you sit outside your home, listening to the faint lap of water against the bank. Your clay tablet rests beside you, the day's number drying in the warm air. The sheep sleep nearby, their breathing slow and steady. You glance toward the dark silhouette of the nilometer chamber and think of the pillar's ancient marks. Each line, each number carved into its surface, was once a living moment like this a day when someone, perhaps centuries ago, stood where you stand now and wondered how high the flood would climb. And as you drift toward sleep, you ask yourself, when the marks are all counted, will the river have given enough for the year ahead, or will the stone bear witness to another season of want? The days lengthen as the water climbs. Each morning, the nilometer's chamber is a little darker, the stone steps descending into shadow where the water now laps at your ankles. The marks on the pillar disappear one by one beneath the rising surface, the numbers swallowed as the flood takes hold. By now, the sheep graze only on the highest ground, their usual pastures reduced to shallow lagoons where reeds sway in the current. Children from the village splash in the warm shallows, laughing as small fish dart between their legs. The flood is not yet at its highest, but it already reshapes the land. Paths vanish, fields lie hidden under brown water, and the air smells of damp earth. Your clay tablet grows heavier with numbers. The climb has been steady more than your father ever recorded in a single season. The scribe visits almost daily now, his sandals muddy from the walk, his papyrus filling with the figures you provide. The priests are said to be pleased. The god Happy has given generously this year. Yet you know from your father's stories that too much generosity can be as dangerous as too little. One morning, the pillar's highest flood mark disappears beneath the surface. The scribe frowns at the reading, tapping his pen against the scroll. "A mighty flood," he says quietly, "but let us hope it does not climb higher." You have no answer for him, the river will do as it will. The peak lasts only a few days. Then slowly, the water begins to fall. The carved marks reappear, first the highest, then the next, until you can descend the steps without getting your tunic wet. The farmers return to the fields, driving stakes into the soft ground to mark new planting beds. The sheep follow, picking at the first tender shoots of grass that have sprung up in the freshly deposited silt. You deliver your final readings of the season to the scribe, who seals them in a jar for the temple archives. It is strange to think that your numbers will rest beside those of men long dead, each of you bound by the same task to note the river's height, day after day, as if holding a conversation across centuries. The harvest will be good, the elders say. The granaries will be full, and the village will have enough to trade for tools, cloth, and perhaps even a new ram for your flock. You feel a quiet satisfaction, not for yourself, but for the simple fact that the river has given what was needed. That evening you stand once more by the nilometer, the chamber dry and warm. You run your hand over the worn marks, feeling the grooves carved by hands you will never know. The pillar has seen countless floods, it will see countless more. And you wonder, when your own marks have faded, when your name is forgotten, will some future shepherd stand here, watching the same river, asking the same question: how high will it rise this year? Story 11. The Toll Keeper of the Silk Road. Section 1. Counting the Caravans. 1,502,000 words. The wind carries the smell of dust and camel sweat long before the caravan appears. You lean against the post of the toll gate, eyes fixed on the horizon where the road disappears into the pale shimmer of the desert. This stretch of the Silk Road is never quiet for long. Trade flows here as steadily as the wind itself. Your station is a small compound, a stone gate straddling the packed earth road, a narrow watchtower, and a ledger room with a desk carved from cedar. A clay jar of water sits in the shade, wrapped in damp cloth to keep it cool. Beyond the walls lies the emptiness of the steppe, broken only by low hills and the occasional plume of dust marking a traveler's approach. When the caravan finally arrives, it is led by a trader you've seen before, a man from Bactria with a red silk turban and a voice like gravel. His camels carry bales wrapped in old cloth, their sides dusty from weeks on the road. The guards riding alongside wear mismatched armor, some lacquered, some of hammered iron, their eyes scanning the horizon even here at the gate. You step forward with your wax tablet and stylus. The toll is set by weight, distance traveled, and the nature of the goods. The bales are placed on the scales and the trader recites their contents: dyed silk, lapis lazuli, dried figs, and musk in small clay jars. You record each item, calculating the payment due. The man grumbles but produces silver coins, which you weigh on a small balance to ensure they are true. The coins go into the locked chest. The figures go into your ledger, written in neat columns that stretch back months. The governor in the nearest city will send for these records at season's end to tally the revenue. But for now, they are your private record of the road's pulse, who passes, what they carry, and how much they pay for the privilege. After the caravan moves on, the road is quiet again. You sweep the dust from the gate's threshold and pour a little water over your head to cool yourself. It is a simple life, some would say, but you know its importance. Every bale of silk that moves west, every pouch of pepper that travels east, must pass through places like this, leaving behind a coin or two for the rulers who keep the road safe. By late afternoon, another group approaches. A smaller party of horsemen carrying leather sacks that smell faintly of almonds and oil. They pay in gold dust, weighed carefully in a shallow dish. You press the dust into small cloth packets for storage, sealing each with wax. Gold is less common than silver here, and its arrival always marks a prosperous route somewhere far away. When the sun begins to sink, painting the hills in long shadows, you close the gate and climb the watchtower. From here, you can see the road stretching in both directions, east toward the mountains, west toward the lowlands and the sea beyond. The wind cools and the first stars appear. Somewhere out there, more caravans are on their way. And you wonder, as you look down at the ledger waiting on your desk, how many more lines will be filled before the season's end. Would you like me to continue to section 2 of story 11? You said, continue. ChatGPT said, all right, here's story 11, section 2. Story 11, The Toll Keeper of the Silk Road. Section 2, The Ledger and the Road, 1, 502,000 words. The next morning, the sky is pale and cloudless, the kind of day when heat will build steadily until even the shadows feel warm. You wake early, sweep the sand from the gatehouse floor, and set out the scales, weights, and wax tablets. The road has a rhythm, and you've learned that mornings often bring smaller traders, those who prefer to travel in the cool hours before the sun climbs high. Sure enough, by mid-morning a donkey train appears from the east. The animals are small and sturdy, their hooves clicking softly on the packed road. Their owner, a wiry man from the mountains, greets you with a respectful nod before unloading bundles of wool and jars of honey sealed with pine resin. You record the weight, note the origin, and accept payment in copper coins. Copper is the most common metal you handle, and though its value is small, its presence in your chest tells you the road is alive with local trade as well as far-flung journeys. The toll system here is simple but strict. All goods that pass through must be declared. Undeclared cargo, if discovered, can be seized by the governor's order. Occasionally, patrol riders from the city stop at your post to check your ledgers against the goods they inspect on the road. You keep your records meticulously, not only because it is your duty, but because in these numbers lies a quiet map of the world's movement. By midday, a large caravan approaches from the west. Their leader is a merchant from the Levant, his beard oiled and his robe embroidered with geometric patterns. He travels with guards in chainmail, and the camels carry heavy loads covered with dyed cloths. As each bale is set on the scale, the smell of cloves and cinnamon fills the air, mixing with the musk of the animals. You note the spices in your ledger, aware that their value far exceeds their weight. The merchant pays in silver ingots, each stamped with a seal you do not recognize. You weigh them carefully, marking their worth in the margin beside his entry. Such marginal notes are for your eyes alone, small reminders of unusual transactions, odd coins, or traders worth remembering. In the afternoon, you pause to drink water under the shade of the gate's arch. A gust of wind blows fine dust across the road, and for a moment the horizon disappears. The road can be dangerous in such storms, and you wonder how many caravans have been lost to the desert's sudden fury. Yet, year after year, traders risk it, because the rewards outweigh the perils. Later, a single rider arrives from the east. He carries no goods, only a satchel of sealed letters. Couriers are exempt from tolls, but you still note his passage in the ledger, marking him with the symbol used for government business. You've learned to recognize some of the couriers by face. They are the road's quiet messengers, bringing news that often moves faster than goods. As evening falls, you lock the chest of coins and dust off the ledger's cover. The day's entries form a pattern: wool and honey from the mountains, spices from the coast, letters from the capital. Tomorrow's page will tell a different story, but it will still be part of the same great thread, the unbroken line of exchange that binds distant lands together. And you wonder, as you blow out the oil lamp and listen to the night wind against the gate, how long the road will carry its endless stream of strangers. Would you like me to continue to section 3 of story 11? You said, continue. ChatGPT said, all right, here's story 11, section 3, the conclusion. Story 11, The Toll Keeper of the Silk Road. Section 3, Seasons on the Road, 1, 502,000 words. By the time the leaves in the river valley have begun to turn, the pace of the caravans changes. Traders hurry to reach the cities before the mountain passes are blocked by snow. The autumn season is the busiest at your post. The road swells with camels, mules, and ox carts, all laden with the year's last goods. The air is cooler now, and the dust no longer hangs as thick in the heat. You stand at the gate from dawn until the last light fades, your hands stained with ink and your mind alert to the stream of transactions. The ledger's pages grow heavier with entries, each line another step in the long journey of trade. One morning, a particularly large caravan arrives from the east. It stretches so far down the road that you cannot see its end from the tower. Their leader is a dignified man from Chang'an, traveling with an interpreter. His camels carry bolts of fine silk in colors you have never seen, deep indigo, pale jade, shimmering gold. When the bales are unloaded for weighing, you catch the faint scent of sandalwood and lacquer. The payment is made in Chinese bronze coins, each with a square hole in the center. You have seen these before, but rarely in such quantity. They make a pleasant ringing sound when dropped into your counting bowl. You record the sum carefully, aware that this entry will stand out in the governor's seasonal review. As days pass, the variety of goods changes. Salted fish from the coast arrives in heavy barrels. Wool cloaks from the highlands, dyed in deep reds and blues, pass through in carts. You even weigh a cage of live peacocks, their feathers catching the low sun in green and gold flashes. The toll for live animals is calculated differently, by count rather than weight, and you smile as you note 3 peacocks in the margin. Not all encounters are easy. Once, a group of horse traders tries to underreport their number of animals. You walk the line yourself, counting each one, your voice calm but firm. They pay the correct toll in the end, muttering under their breath as they lead their horses through the gate. It is not the first time someone has tried such a trick, and it will not be the last. When winter's breath begins to creep over the steppe, the flow of travelers thins. The mountains to the east are now impassable, and those heading west hurry to reach the warmer lowlands. You sit in the watchtower at dusk, looking over the ledger for the season. Pages of neat script detail the movement of the world, the silk and spices, the metals and wool, the coins and gold dust, all recorded in the same steady hand. You seal the ledger with wax and store it in the chest with the coins, ready for the governor's men to collect. The road will not be silent in winter. Local traders and couriers will still pass, but the great caravans will wait for spring. As the cold wind sweeps across the empty road, you think of the countless seasons before your time and the countless ones that will follow. The toll gate will stand, the ledgers will fill, and the road will carry its endless stream of exchange long after your name has faded from the records. And you wonder, as you close the gate for the night, if some distant toll keeper centuries from now will still hear the same creak of the hinges and the same whisper of the wind over the road. Shall I move on to Story 12, The Bridge Builder of Baghdad, Section 1? You said. Continue. ChatGPT said. All right, here's Story 12, Section 1. Story 12, The Bridge Builder of Baghdad. Section 1, Measuring the River 1, 502,000 words. The Tigris lies wide and slow beneath the morning haze, its surface a shifting mirror for the pale sky. From the riverbank, you can see the city's domes and minarets rising beyond the date palms, their outlines softened by the heat already building in the air. Baghdad hums with movement, merchants calling in the souk, donkeys clattering over cobblestones, the scent of bread drifting from clay ovens. But here at the water's edge, the sound is the low, steady rush of the river itself. You stand with a length of knotted rope in your hands, measuring the distance between the two banks. It is not the first time you've done this. For weeks, you've returned each morning to mark the changes in the current, the rise and fall of the water. The Caliph's engineers have instructed you to find the best site for a new bridge, one that will hold against the floods of spring and the heat of summer alike. The work begins with observation. You note where the current flows strongest, where eddies form along the shore, and where the silt builds into slow, shifting bars. You watch the fishermen haul in their nets, noting the places where they cast them most often, for these are the calmer waters, less likely to undermine a pier's foundations. Your measuring rope is weighted with a lead plumb at one end. You throw it into the water, letting it sink, then draw it taut to gauge the depth. The figures go into a wax tablet, alongside sketches of the banks and marks for the river's bends. Already, you can see the patterns emerging, a slight narrowing where the current is swift but the banks are firm with stone. At midday, the sun is high and the city's noise drifts faintly over the water. You take shade beneath the arch of an old footbridge upstream, watching as a train of donkeys crosses with panniers of grain. The planks creak under their weight, and the ropes that bind them sway with each step. The bridge is old, older than you, and it cannot carry the growing trade of the city much longer. This is why the Caliph has ordered the new one, something broader, stronger, capable of holding carts and caravans without strain. In the afternoon, you walk the bank with a reed stylus tucked behind your ear, measuring the width again at lower points. A group of children follows at a distance, curious about your work. One of them calls out to ask if the bridge will be tall enough for the great trading boats. You nod, it must be, or the merchants will curse it before it is even finished. By evening, your wax tablet is filled with numbers, sketches, and notes about the river's mood. The Tigris is never the same 2 days in a row, yet it has a memory. The floods always come from the same direction. The silt settles in familiar shapes. The current hums in a way you have learned to read like a craftsman reads grain in wood. As you head back toward the city gates, the last sunlight catches the water in gold streaks. You know tomorrow you will return, rope in hand, to take the river's measure again. For if the bridge is to stand for generations, its foundations must be set in a place the river itself accepts. And you wonder, as the evening call to prayer echoes across the city, whether the bridge you build will outlast even the walls of Baghdad. Would you like me to continue to section 2 of story 12? You said, continue. ChatGPT said, all right, here's story 12, section 2. Story 12, The Bridge Builder of Baghdad. Section 2, Stone, Timber, and Rope 1,502,000 words. The site has been chosen, a firm stretch of riverbank where the water runs deep but steady, and where the city's main road meets the shore at a gentle slope. Now comes the work of gathering what the bridge will need. Stone for piers, timber for beams, and rope to lash it all together during the first stages of construction. Stone arrives first, carried on barges from quarries upstream. The blocks are rough cut on the riverbank, their surfaces chipped smooth by teams of masons who work under the shade of reed canopies. The sound is constant, chisel on limestone, hammer on chisel, the sharp crack when a seam gives way. Dust hangs in the air, clinging to your skin, tasting faintly of chalk. Next comes the timber. Great logs of cedar and teak are floated downriver from forests far to the north and east. These are hauled ashore with ropes, rolled over greased planks and stacked in careful piles. The carpenters measure each length, marking the cuts that will form the bridge's frame. The smell of fresh-cut wood mingles with the scent of the river, a reminder that even here in the heat and dust, life grows in far-off places. The rope is made locally, twisted from palm fibers and coated with oil to resist the weather. You watch as the rope makers walk backward in long, careful steps, spinning the strands together while keeping the tension even. These ropes will hold scaffolding, lift stone blocks, and anchor beams until the final structure is complete. Every morning, you meet with the master builder to review the plans. The bridge will rest on stone piers sunk deep into the riverbed. Between them, heavy timber beams will span the water, topped with planks wide enough for 2 carts to pass side by side. Guardrails will line the edges, and the central section will be high enough for the largest river boats to pass beneath without lowering their masts. The first challenge is sinking the piers. Workers drive wooden piles into the riverbed, creating cofferdams, circular walls that hold back the current. Inside these, the water is pumped out by hand with buckets, leaving a muddy pit where the foundation stones can be laid. The work is slow and dangerous. The current presses hard against the walls, and any weakness can send water rushing in. You spend hours inspecting each cofferdam, checking for leaks, ordering repairs before the damage spreads. As the first pier rises from the river, you feel a strange sense of relief. Until now, the bridge has existed only in drawings and measurements. But here, in the flow of the Tigris, is the first solid shape of what will one day carry the weight of the city's trade. The work draws attention. Merchants stop on their way to the market to watch the masons at their task. Children wade in the shallows, searching for chips of stone to play with. Even the fishermen, who usually avoid this stretch of bank, pause to study the progress. Some mutter that the bridge will change the river's ways. Others nod in approval, seeing the promise of faster trade. By late afternoon, the air cools and the shadows stretch across the water. The day's work slows and the tools are set aside. You walk the length of the temporary scaffolding, the planks shifting slightly underfoot, and watch the current swirl around the base of the new pier. The river seems to test it, probing for weakness. You know the real test will come in the spring floods. If the piers hold then, they will hold for decades. But if the river finds a flaw, the bridge may fail before it is finished. And as you close your notebook for the day, you wonder, will the structure you build command the river's respect, or will the river one day reclaim its own? Would you like me to continue to section 3 of story 12? You said, continue. ChatGPT said, all right, here's story 12, section 3, the conclusion. Story 12, the bridge builder of Baghdad. Section 3, the first crossing 1,502,000 words. Winter passes quietly along the river, the work continuing even as cold winds sweep through Baghdad's streets. The piers rise one by one, each topped with a level platform of stone. Between them the carpenters set the great cedar beams, their ends resting securely in carved sockets. Over these, planks are laid and pegged, forming the broad deck that will carry carts, riders, and walkers alike. The city watches the progress with growing anticipation. Merchants calculate how much faster goods will move once they no longer need to wait for ferries. Farmers from the far bank imagine bringing their produce to market in the same morning it's harvested. Even the fishermen speak of new opportunities, for the bridge will allow them to sell directly to customers across the river. By early spring, the guardrails are in place and the last gaps in the deck are filled. The scaffolding is removed, leaving the bridge standing alone, a span of stone and timber over the slow green water. The current swirls around the piers, but they stand firm, their foundations deep in the riverbed. The Caliph has decreed that the first crossing will be a public celebration. On the appointed morning, the city gathers at both ends of the bridge. Colorful awnings are raised, musicians tune their instruments, and the air smells of roasting lamb and sweet pastries. The master builder inspects the structure one final time, running his hand along the smooth cedar rail. You walk the length of the deck, listening to the creak of the wood, feeling the faint vibration as the water moves below. When the signal is given, the first carts roll forward, their iron-bound wheels clattering on the planks. Behind them come riders on decorated horses, followed by townspeople carrying baskets of fruit and jars of honey. The bridge takes the weight easily, the timbers firm beneath the crowd's steady movement. On the far bank, people cheer as the first group arrives, the sound carrying over the water like a wave. You remain near the center of the span, watching the two halves of the city meet above the river. For months, you have known this place as a site of labor, the pounding of chisels, the shouts of workers, the constant smell of wood and wet stone. Now it belongs to the people, and the river flows beneath it as if it has always been there. Later, when the sun sets and the crowd disperses, you linger on the deck. The lanterns hung along the guardrails cast warm reflections on the water, and the sound of the current is low and steady. You know the river will one day test the bridge in floods, in storms, perhaps even in times of war. But for now, it stands ready, linking two banks with a single unbroken path. You close your notebook for the last time, the final entry reading simply, "Bridge complete. First crossing successful." The rest is in the hands of the river and the city. And you wonder, as you walk back toward the lights of Baghdad, if this bridge will still stand when those who built it are only names in old ledgers.